Welcome, and we're glad to have you today. My name is Bob Thornton, and I'm the chairman of the commission. Before we get started, I've asked Ed Whedon to lead us in prayer, followed by the pledge by Commissioner Inman. Please rise.
Let us pray. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and lead us not to lead us one of those days. And forgive us our debtors as we forgive those who did against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and glory forever. O merciful Father, we give you thanks today, Lord God, for allowing us to be in your presence one more time, Lord God. We ask you to come into this place, Lord God, and make the decisions that are made by Planning Commission, Lord, be very good for the city and not just for greed and consumption, Father God. We just ask you to bless each commissioner that's up there at the podium, Father God, to touch their hearts and touch their minds, Lord God, and have them make the right choices. And bless everyone that's in this room, Lord, from the top of their head to the soles of their feet. We ask you to, Lord God, just to make this meeting a productive meeting, Lord God, and bless everyone that's in this room and those that are here and those that are on their way and those who wanted to be here but for whatever reason could not be here. We just ask you, Lord, to touch them, Lord, and of any aches and pains and sickness in their bodies. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I got it. Thank you, Ed, for the prayer, and thank you, Commissioner Inman, for the pledge. I've asked Commissioner Hodson to introduce the members.
Thank you, Mr. Thornton. To my right, which is your left, on the end over there is Kay Wilson. She is our city attorney. Next to Kay is Jack Wall. Jack is a civil engineer, and he represents the Rose Hall District. Next, you have Dr. Kwasny. She's a professor of literature and cultural studies. She represents Princess Anne. Next is Don Horsley. Don's a farmer, and he's an at-large member. Next is Ron Ripley. Ron is in real estate management and development, and he's also an at-large member. Next is Jan Rosinski. Jan's a property manager. She represents the Centerfield District, and she is the secretary of the Planning Commission. Next, you have our chairman, Mr. Thornton. Mr. Thornton is in commercial real estate, sales, leasing, and development, and as I mentioned, he is our chairman. Next is our vice chair, which is Dee Oliver. Dee is a funeral director, and she is an at-large member. My name is Jeff Hodson. I'm in real estate management, and I represent the Beach District. Beside me is Mike Inman. Mike is an attorney, a real estate attorney. He is an at-large member. And next you have David Weiner. David is in commercial sales. He represents the Kempsville District. Next is Dave Redmond. Dave Redmond is commercial real estate sales. He represents the Bayside District. And beside Dave is Barry Frankenfield, and Barry is our director. Barry, if you would, please introduce your staff.
All right, thank you very much. I'd like to introduce Ed Whedon, who I usually try to make a joke about. I can't think of one today, except when the voting system doesn't work, it's not his fault. So you're going to have to do verbals on everything. So thank you, Ed, for all your support. In the planner bench, we have Kevin Kemp, our zoning administrator, Carolyn Smith, planning administrator, Dr. Stephen White, Jimmy McNamara. I'm going to miss somebody. Robert Davis, Marshall Coleman, and way in the back is Jonathan Sanders. So thank you, staff, for being here today.
Thank you, Barry. The next order of business is the explanation of the rules that we use to run the meetings. I've asked Commissioner Rosinski to explain these rules.
Thank you very much, Chairman Thornton. The Virginia Beach Planning Commission takes pride in being fair and courteous to all parties in attendance. It is important that all involved that understand how the commission conducts its meetings. It's equally important that everyone treat each other and the members of this commission with respect and civility. The commission requests that if you have a cell phone to please silence it or turn it off at this time. This is an abbreviated explanation of the rules. A complete set of the rules is located in the front of the Planning Commission agenda. Withdrawals and deferrals. The chairman will ask if there's a request for any matter to be withdrawn or deferred. Consideration of these requests will be made first. Consent agenda. The second order of business is the consideration of the consent agenda, which are those items which the Planning Commission believes are unopposed and have favorable staff recommendation. Regular agenda. The Commission will then proceed with the remaining items on the agenda. Please note that actions taken by the Commission today are in the form of a recommendation to the Virginia Beach City Council. The final decision for approval or disapproval of any agenda item will be made by City Council. The Commission thanks you for your attendance. We hope that your experience here today leaves you feeling that you have been heard and treated fairly. We do have one side note today. We have a very large attendance. We do have a lot of speakers that want to speak today, and we do want to hear everybody. We do ask that you respect the time lights that are on the podium, and that the yellow light means wrap it up, and the red light means to stop. So we would appreciate it if you would respect that. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Rosinski, for the explanation of the rules. The first order of business is going to be not quite exactly like we do it every year. We have to have a nominating committee for the leadership of the Planning Commission, and I'd like to make a motion that we amend the agenda to allow for the nominating committee's report. Do I have a motion? Sure. Call for the question. And this is our first vote, our first verbal vote. So,
Bob, you made the motion?
yeah, we made the motion. Could I have a motion?
Second.
And a second?
Okay. Jeff?
Aye.
Don?
Aye.
Mike?
Aye.
Karen?
Aye.
Dee?
Aye.
Dave? Ron?
Aye.
Jan?
Aye.
Bob?
Aye.
Jack?
Aye.
Dave? By a vote of 11-0, the commission has amended today's agenda.
Okay, thank you. And now I'd like to ask the chair of the nominating committee, Ron Ripley, to give his report, please.
Mr. Chairman, the nominating committee met, and our recommendations are for Chairman Bob Thornton, Vice Chairman Dee Oliver, and Secretary Jan Ruzinski.
Okay, do I have a second to that
Second.
motion? Okay, we call for the question?
Ron made the motion?
Yes.
Who seconded it?
Don.
Don.
Okay.
I don't think it needs a second.
Jeff?
Aye.
John says yes. Mike?
Aye.
Ms. Crosby?
Aye.
Ms. Oliver?
Aye.
Mr. Redmond?
Aye.
Mr. Ripley?
Aye.
Ms. Rosinski?
Aye.
Mr. Thornton?
Aye.
Mr. Wall?
Aye.
Mr. Weaver?
Aye.
By a vote of 11-0, the commissioner has approved the officers, Bob Thornton for chairman, Dee Oliver for vice chairman, and Jan Rosinski for secretary for the 2018 Planning Commission.
Thank you. Thank you. Look forward to another year of serving with you nice folks. The next order of business is to address the items that are to be withdrawn or deferred. It has been brought to, if you have an item that needs to be either withdrawn or deferred, please come forth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Eddie Burdon, Virginia Beach Attorney, representing John and Karen Waller on case number 8. That would be deferred indefinitely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there, any opposition to this matter being on the deferred? Hearing none. Is there a speaker here for item number 5, PAR 5 development? I'm sorry.
No,
We'll do
7.
the deferral. Number 7, is there a speaker here for number 7, BMVS? The chair's been made aware that this is also to be deferred. Could I have a motion to defer items number 7 and number 8?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to move that items 7 and 8 be deferred.
Second.
Second? Yeah, we're going to defer items 7 and 8. Dee made the motion and Don made the second.
Mr. Hodgson?
Aye.
Mr. Worsley said, Mr. Inman?
Aye.
Ms. Crosby?
Aye.
Ms. Oliver?
Aye.
Mr. Redmond?
Aye.
Mr. Ripley?
Aye.
Ms. Rosinski?
Aye.
Mr. Thornton?
Aye.
Mr. Wall?
Aye.
Mr. Weaver?
Yeah, aye.
By a vote of 11-0, the commission has deferred items 7 and 8.
The chair has also been made aware that items number 5 and number 6 are to be withdrawn. Is there anybody here to speak in behalf of those cases? Can I have a motion to withdraw items 5 and 6?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to move that items 5 and 6 be withdrawn from the agenda.
Second.
Second by Jan. Call for the question, please.
Mr. Hodgson?
Aye.
Mr. Worthly?
Aye.
Mr. Inman?
Aye.
Ms. Quasney?
Aye.
Ms. Oliver?
Aye.
Mr. Redmond?
Aye.
Ms. Wood?
Aye.
Ms. Rosinski?
Aye.
Mr. Thornton?
Aye.
Mr. Wall?
Aye.
Mr. Weaver?
Aye.
By a vote of 11-0, the commission has withdrawn items 5 and 6.
The next items we'll address are those items that are placed on our consent agenda. The vice chair will handle this portion of the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This afternoon, we have 4 items on the consent agenda. The first matter is agenda item number 1, and this is an application of Tatiana Veal for conditional use permit, a family daycare home on property located at 1504 Casby Court, District 3, Rose Hall. Is there a representative
She's here.
for this application? If you would come up, please. Hi.
Hi,
If you will state your name for the record, please.
Tatiana Veal.
Great, thank you. And are the conditions set forth in the application acceptable to you?
Yes,
Great, thank you. You can take your seat.
thank you.
Is there any opposition to this being placed on the consent agenda? Hearing none, the chairman has asked Commissioner Wall to read this into the record.
Thank you. The applicant requests a conditional use permit for family daycare home to care for up to 12 children within a single-family dwelling. The applicant has 8 years of experience working in the child care field. The property has an enclosed backyard for the children to safely play outdoors and a large driveway that can accommodate up to 4 vehicles. The proposed hours of operation are 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., Monday through Friday. In our opinion, this is consistent with the comprehensive plan's land use policies for residential areas, and will provide a valuable service for families in the suburban area. Since the conditions are acceptable to the applicant and staff recommends approval, we place this item on the consent agenda.
Thank you. The next matter is agenda item number 2. This is an application of Decor LLC as an applicant and an owner for a subdivision variance, section 4.4B of the subdivision regulations on property located on Ferry Point Road, District 2, Kempsville. Is there a representative? Hello.
Thank you. Vice Chair Oliver, members of the commission, for the record, Eddie Burdon, Virginia Beach Attorney, representing the applicant. The 5 conditions recommended in the staff evaluation are all acceptable to my client, and we appreciate Marcel's hard work on the application, and thanks for being on the consent agenda.
Thank you. Is there any opposition to this being placed on the consent agenda? Hearing none, the chairman has asked Commissioner Weiner to read this into the record.
Thank you, Mrs. Oliver. The applicant requests a subdivision variance to section 4.4B of the subdivision regulations to subdivide a lot 4A into 3 parcels consisting of 3 single-family dwellings. Proposed parcels 4A and 2 and 4B meet the requirements of the zoning ordinance for development of a single-family dwelling in R5D residential duplex district. Parcel 4A1 is a proposed flag lot with 25 feet lot width rather than 50 feet required. Based on the subdivision variance, the lot width is requested. The lot is well in excess of the minimum lot requirements of the 5,000 square foot required. The proposed subdivision variance is consistent with the existing layout of the west side of Ferry Point Road, and as such, staff recommends approval, and we put it on the consent agenda.
Thank you. The next matter is agenda item number 4. And this is an application of Princess Anne Shops, Owner Association Incorporated, as applicant and owner for a modification of proffers located on the northwest corner of intersection of North Landing Road and George Mason Drive, District 7, Princess Anne.
Back again. Again, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, for the record, Eddie Burdon, Virginia Beach Attorney representing the Princess Anne Shops. Appreciate this item being on the consent agenda. It's a proffered item. Want to thank the Historic Review Board as well as Jonathan. And since I'm going to be scooting out of here and not staying for all the festivities, everybody have a wonderful Christmas and a Happy New Year, and thanks for your service this past year. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any opposition to this being placed on the consent agenda? Hearing none, the chairman has asked Commissioner Kwanzi to read this into the record.
Thank you, Vice Chair Oliver. This is a request in the Princess Anne District for a modification of proffers to install a freestanding sign that does not reflect the sign elevation referenced in the proffers. Property is located in the sub-area of the Princess Anne Commons. It is also located in the Courthouse Historic and Cultural Overlay District. Therefore, the revised sign design was considered by the Historic Review Board at their November 2017 meeting. The board deemed the sign consistent with Historic and Cultural District sign guidelines, and as such, a certificate of appropriateness was issued. The proffered site layout depicts 2 freestanding signs, however, only one sign will be constructed. The proposed externally illuminated monument is 5 feet 9 inches tall. It's finished in brick or brick veneer with a red vinyl background that matches the existing Princess Anne Shops monument sign. Staff finds this consistent with the Princess Anne Common Comp Plan Design Guidelines, suggests placing it on the consent agenda, and the Planning Commission deems to do so.
Thank you. The next matter is agenda item number 15. This is an ordinance to amend Section 901 of the City Zoning Ordinance to allow off-site parking facilities as permanent uses in the B2 zoning district with specified requirements. And our zoning administrator, Mr. Kemp, is going to read this.
Thank you,
for us.
Commissioner Oliver. This ordinance amendment would allow off-site parking facilities to be permitted by right in the B2 district. They are currently permitted in the B3 and B4C districts, but not in the B2. These lots would still be subject to Section 2358 of the City Code, which regulates buffer requirements, maintenance of it, what it's constructed of, and so it would be standard. We feel that with these regulations, it does not impact adjacent properties and is compatible in the B2 district, and staff has recommended approval.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, that was our last item on the consent agenda. So I would like to move to approve consent agenda items number 1, 2, 4, and 15.
Okay, we have a motion to approve 1, 2, 4, and 15. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Hodson. Ready for the vote.
Mr. Hodson?
Aye.
Mr. Horsley?
Aye.
Mr. Inman?
Aye.
Mr. Posny?
Aye.
Ms. Oliver?
Aye.
Mr. Redmond?
Aye.
Mr. Ripley?
Aye.
Mr. Lozinski?
Aye.
Mr. Thornton?
Aye.
Mr. Wall?
Aye.
Mr. Weiner?
Aye.
By a vote of 11 to 0, the commission has approved items 1, 2, 4, and 15 for consent.
Thank you. I would like to thank all the applicants who had a matter on the consent agenda for attending today's hearings. These items will now be placed on the City Council agenda, and we will now address the remaining items on our agenda. And I'd like to ask the Secretary to call the first item.
Thank you, Chairman Thornton. Okay, the first item is item number 3, Hertz Corporation, which is an application for a conditional use permit, motor vehicle rentals on property located at 1116 Lynn Haven Parkway, District 3, Rose Hall. Do we have a representative for that application? If you could state your name for the record and then explain your application, please.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Jimmy Williams with the Hertz Corporation. I do agree with what has been provided. Based on the proper approvals, I think this would be a good addition to not only to the city, but also to the general public.
Thank you.
Any questions of the speaker? Thank you, and stand by. We may have some later.
Okay, we have one speaker in opposition, and that is Frank Driscoll Jr.
That's a mistake. You can withdraw that.
Oh, thank
Okay.
you.
Does it go with a different application?
It was supposed to go with the short-term rentals.
Okay.
So we have one person in favor, no people against. Normally, those are the kind we put on the consent agenda, but we thought we had to move this one. So I'd like to close the public hearing on this. Any questions? Dave? Like a
Mr.
motion?
Chairman, I'd move approval of the application.
I'll second.
Second from Mr. Redmond. First, motion by Mr. Redmond, Mr. Weiner, second. Call for the question.
Mr. Hodson?
Aye.
Mr. Worthing?
Aye.
Mr. Inman?
Aye.
Mr. Quasley?
Aye.
Ms. Oliver?
Aye.
Mr. Redmond?
Aye.
Mr. Ripley?
Aye.
Mr. Lozinski?
Aye.
Mr. Thornton?
Aye.
Mr. Wall?
Aye.
Mr. Weiner?
Aye.
By a vote of 11-0, the commission has approved the application of Hearst Corporation.
Okay, thank you. The next item to be heard today is item number 9, City of Virginia Beach, an ordinance to amend sections 111 and 218 of the city zoning ordinance pertaining to the definition of major retail venue.
Thank you, Commissioner Rosinski. For the record, Kevin Kemp, zoning administrator. This amendment, proposed amendment to the ordinance would create a definition of a major retail venue. For the purposes of this ordinance, that definition is it would have to meet the following criteria: more than 4 million square feet, which, as we pointed out in the informal, is just over 91 acres. Its principal use has to be retail shopping and or indoor rec. What this also does is allow for the signage package for a major retail venue to be considered by council, similar to major entertainment venues under Section 218. This was brought forward by Councilwoman Kane for your consideration. Staff has recommended approval of this ordinance, and I am happy to answer any questions.
Any questions of Mr. Kemp? If not, stand by. We may have some, do we have any?
Hold on, I do have
Oh.
one question. So the city supports this?
The staff has recommended
Staff
approval.
recommends approval?
Yes.
Right, okay. Got it, thanks.
Mr. Ripley?
In the informal discussions we had, I think there's general support of this, which is good for what you're trying to solve. But the question is, how can we apply it to other large retail areas and apply it so it's fair? And I think that's the dilemma the commission was wrestling with this morning. Have you thought about it? Do you have any ideas on that?
Well, as it stands now, 4 million square feet, there are very few major retail venues in the city that would qualify under that. This really addresses a unique situation. And I would say, in my mind, there's only one site, being Lynn Haven Mall, that this really applies to. As their signage package and condition is very unique, the way it is. And I can elaborate if you wish.
Well, the 4 million square feet is unique, but is there any other way to look at that? Is there other sizes we could look at that might encompass
Well, of
other
course.
properties? And again, the commission is concerned about whether or not other property owners have had an opportunity to understand this.
Absolutely. And just to give you a little background on the 400 square feet, that large number was put into place to not include every strip center, for instance, down Virginia Beach Boulevard, so that council wouldn't have to consider all those sign packages. That was put to really limit the scope of this. That was the intention. What that magic number is, if we were to lower it, that could be up for discussion. But that is the reason why that was chosen.
And that's the reason why we're hearing it.
Yes. So.
Jack?
So tell us about the major entertainment venue signage. So this aligns with the same signage requirements as the major entertainment venues?
It allows city council to approve a sign package. The only difference, and you heard one from the aquarium last month, you considered one.
Okay.
The only difference is this does not allow for electronic LED signs.
Okay.
Where the major entertainment venue does.
David?
Kevin, could you tell us what this is about, the background to it? I mean, there's an issue here. I think, not only do we have a room full of people, but there's a television audience, and I think our citizenry has a right to understand what this is really about. Would you describe the problem and how this attempts to solve it, please?
Absolutely. This proposed ordinance was born out of a consideration for Lynn Haven Mall. They are currently rebranding and want to redo their signage package. I mentioned earlier it was a unique situation. The uniqueness is that the mall road is currently publicly owned. When the mall was developed, that was privately owned. The city has since taken over ownership of that. Their existing freestanding signs that are on the major thoroughfares are on parcels owned by them on the other side of the road. By the definition of our ordinance, that makes them billboards. And our ordinance does not allow for billboards, and this amendment would allow for that type of signage in the capacity of the major retail venue, would allow them to replace that sign. Should be noted, if they were just refacing the sign, we could do that administratively. They wish to move a couple signs to areas of greater visibility and increase the size of a few of their freestanding signs.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Mike?
My comment on this is that we just learned a whole lot about this proposed ordinance this morning and didn't really know much about it before, and what its purpose was was focused on a particular property. And from what I understood in our informal session discussions, there was really no discussion with other major retail center owners about the number of 4 million square feet as being a threshold for application of this ordinance. And it just seemed maybe premature to be passing an ordinance which doesn't mention Lynn Haven Mall in here, and it also doesn't mention per se public right-of-way being impacted. And there could, I think we need to look at what other centers, retail centers in the city might be considered. There could be a center that would be 3,600,000 square feet that would be should be entitled to the same rights and privileges, so to speak, of this ordinance. And the definition of major retail venue this is an establishment located in other than an agricultural, residential, or apartment district on any zoning lot of 4 million square feet or more, principal use of which is entertainment and retail. And it just seems to me that with the short notice that we've had in getting information on exactly what we're dealing with here, it would be better if we could consider this, reach out to other stakeholders, consider other stakeholders' needs and the application to other properties in the city. And on that basis, I would move for a deferral of this application or this ordinance consideration till the February Planning Commission meeting, and that we ask City Council for an extension for that purpose to consider this ordinance further.
I'll second that.
Well, wait, we've got to finish this chat with Kevin and then close the public hearing. And there may be some people here to speak in it. Is anybody else signed up to speak in this?
No.
Did anybody else have any questions of Kevin? Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners.
I do have one question, sorry.
Okay,
I've got one
Jack, go
question.
ahead.
The 4 million square feet, I know that's, there's a specific, reason for that, but can you say, throughout the ordinance, are there plenty of arbitrary square footages that are listed? More than one location, aren't there?
Well, unless we tie our ordinances into other codes, such as the building code, a lot of numbers are arbitrary in the sense that we're choosing them, but we do choose them normally on a factual basis. 150 square feet is a smaller accessory structure that gets reduced setbacks, that came from the building code, but there are numbers, yes, that are arbitrary, but it's based on, if we pick a number, we examine what other localities do, industry standards, that sort of thing, and the existing conditions. We try not to be too arbitrary.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any more questions for Kevin? Calling once. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Now I'd like to close the public hearing, and anybody have any comments to make amongst ourselves before we have a motion? No? Okay, now you can make your motion.
I move that we defer this matter until the February Planning Commission meeting, and that at the same time, we ask City Council for an extension on providing an approval or disapproval of this ordinance proposal.
Okay. Is that satisfactory?
Yes,
Okay. Okay. Ron?
And I am going to second that, and for the record, I am in favor of improving their commerce if this helps the Lynn Haven Mall, but I'm interested to know that there aren't other conditions, as Mike has pointed out, that are applicable here as well. And that's the purpose of the deferral. It's the purpose I'm second.
Okay, so we have a motion and we have a second. You got that?
And
Mike made the motion to defer and to request City Council to move it to the February meeting, and Ron seconded that. Call.
Mr. Hodgson,
Aye.
is that for the deferral?
It's one motion.
For the motion.
Yes for the motion.
Mr. Worsley?
Aye.
Mr. Newman?
Aye.
Ms. Podman?
Aye.
Ms. Oliver?
Aye.
Mr. Redmond?
Aye.
Mr. Richter?
Aye.
Mr. Rosinski?
Aye.
Mr. Thornton?
Aye?
Mr. Wall?
Aye.
Mr. Weiner?
Aye.
I vote by 11-0, the commission has deferred the item of City of Virginia Beach ordinance to amend sections 111 and 218 of the city's zoning ordinance pertaining to the definition of major venue until February meeting, notifying council of the deferral.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, the next item on the agenda, we're going to be combining items 10 through 14 into one hearing, and that is an ordinance to amend Section 102, 111, 401, 501, 601, 901, 1110, 1125, 1521, and 2203 of the city zoning ordinance and Section 5.2 of the Oceanfront Resort District Form-Based Code, and add Section 209.6, 241.2 of the city zoning ordinance pertaining to the definition requirements and use of home sharing and short-term rentals, which includes the ordinance to add Article 23 consisting of Sections 2300 and 2303 short-term rental overlay district to the city zoning ordinance establishing regulations and requirements pertaining to short-term rentals, and an ordinance to amend the official zoning map by the distinction and incorporation of property into short-term rental overlay district, an ordinance to amend Sections 111, 401, 501, 601, 901, 1110, 1125, 1521, and 2203 of the city zoning ordinance and Section 5.2 of the Oceanfront Resort District Form-Based Code, and add Sections 209.6 and 241.2 of the city zoning ordinance pertaining to the definition requirements and use of home sharing and short-term rentals, an ordinance to amend Sections 111, 401, 501, 601, 901, 1110, 1125, 1521, and 2203 of the city zoning ordinance and Sections 5.2 of the Oceanfront Resort District Form-Based Code, and add Section 209.6 of the city zoning ordinance pertaining to definitions, requirements, and use of home occupation for short-term rentals. Wow, now
Can you
that was
repeat
a
that, please?
mouthful.
Now, before we get started, if you came in late and you did not sign a card to speak, what I would like to ask you to do is to hold up your hand, and I'd like to ask Barry to have one of your folks pass the card. Instead of having everybody that didn't sign a card come forward, if you didn't sign a card and you want to speak, hold your hand up, and Jonathan will hand you a card, and then we need to get them up here. And when you come up to speak, clearly state your name for the record, and then let us know what your thoughts are, and be very mindful of the clock. We have a lot of people to speak today, and if you speak for a large group, you have 10 minutes. If you're speaking for yourself, you have 3 minutes. And we ask you to just be fair about that. So with that, we're going to wait until, we can get the cards, but if you do want to speak, you need to fill out a card. So we can call the,
Okay. And also, if you'll let us know, some of you had indicated what, if there was a particular one of these alternatives that you were in favor or against, if you can make sure to let us know that also. We will be calling those that have signed a card in support first, and these are in no particular order. Jack Drescher.
Chairman, Madam Vice Chair, members of the Commission, I'm Jack Drescher, and I'm president of the North Virginia Beach Civic League. However, as coincidence would have it, I also chaired the ad hoc online rental committee as well, and so I feel as though I'm fairly knowledgeable about at least the background as to why we are here. And all I hope is that you don't quiz me on any of those particular ordinances, 'cause I have not read them. The committee, at its inception, was charged by City Council with an effort to try and figure out how to deal with short-term rentals. We conducted several public meetings. I met with staff. The entire committee met with staff. We talked with the city attorney's office at length. We also worked fairly closely with Tom Frame and the Beach and Waterways Committee, which studied event houses. And what we found was that these issues tend to meld together to a certain degree. And so our committee, and I'm going to speak on behalf of the North End, but I think the background is important, looked at length at a number of different issues that were involved in this. Primarily, of course, we had some concerns about public health, safety, and welfare, a fair taxation plan, because the bricks and mortar real estate folks were not being treated the same as the online virtual folks were. There was no way to make those people properly respond to the city commissioners of revenues office in order for taxation to occur. And then perhaps most importantly, at least for the committee, we dealt in terms of residential neighborhoods and how we were going to deal with those with commercial activity, which in effect this is, ongoing at the same time. So the recommendations that you see in the matrix that I've been provided by the city attorney's office essentially came from the ad hoc committee. This was not something that was authored out of hand by the city attorney's office or zoning. This is something that we came up with because we felt like it was very important, for example, that transient occupancy taxes were properly assessed against everyone, that registration was required for everyone, that there would be on-site parking, trash must be in automated bins, there must be an insurance requirement. That was a real critical one for us because we were worried that somebody could get hurt and they wouldn't have any access to insurance. There needed to be a contact person. That was one of the major complaints that we heard. There was nobody to whom anybody could complain for online rental happenings in certain residential neighborhoods. The occupancy was really we were sort of lukewarm about that. We felt like, for example, under option one, if it was an owner occupied short-term rental situation, that the owner would pretty much handle that himself or herself. He's not going to have 50 people living in his house, for example. We just didn't think that that was going to be a problem. We also wanted to avoid the circumstance where, for example, an owner wanted to have a wedding at his house with any number of people coming. Would it be fair to have an event permit required for that? And we felt that it would not. Thus, the differentiation between owner-occupied short-term rentals and short-term rentals by someone who is an off-site owner. So in looking at the various options that are available, that at least the three that you have been given, the North Virginia Beach Civic League opted for option one. We felt like that was the best. However, it was a very close call that option two would be satisfactory. We felt, frankly, that option three was a tad draconian, that it was a little restrictive, but that was our sense of it. But, we would live with that. Our neighborhood is different, for example, than Great Neck Point or Old Nation or Wichita Point. We've had rentals at the North End, since I was a boy and well beyond, a number of years more than I like to think about. The same holds true for Sandwich. They're in a little different set of circumstances than, say, Kempsville, any of the Kempsville residences. So we understand that, so the overlay sort of made sense to us, that if you employed that, then obviously that would, whatever applied to the North End, for example, would not necessarily apply to, say, Bay Colony, just by way of example. So those are the reasons that we reached the conclusions that we did. I have no intention of taking my full 10 minutes. However, you may have some questions of me as to how we reached certain circumstances, and I'm glad to answer them if you have them.
Thank you. Any questions of Mr. Drescher? David?
Mr. Drescher, when y'all looked at parking, on-site parking, did you dig into it? Did you look at how many cars, or how did you, was there a number? Did you think about a number, or per residents, or per people that were staying in the short-term rental?
Yes. Simple answer to your question is yes. There were any number of photographs of the event houses at Sandbridge that took place, and you would see buses, literally, and cars parked all over the front yard of a place. You would see cars and indeed buses parked in illegal parking spots, which created problems for the neighbors. So yes, but for us to become intimately involved in how we establish specific parking regulations, we felt that it really wasn't appropriate for the committee to necessarily make those recommendations. That was more of a zoning function and a city attorney's function to sort of figure out, in conjunction with all of those ordinances, what would work and what would not work. So yes, the simple answer to the question is yes, but it wasn't a direct answer.
Do you have a question?
I do.
Dee?
Tell me how you all came to the conclusion that you preferred an overlay versus no overlay.
In actuality, it could be either way for us. I mean, you know, when we say the overlay, we were sort of trying to reach out to the rest of the city and say, you know, we understand that you may not want an overlay at all, but we want to make sure that you have your voice heard. So it was sort of a deference to other neighborhoods as opposed to something they wouldn't necessarily like. Options 1 or 2 are fine with us. Frankly, option 3 would work in
Right.
the north end.
Right.
So, you know, I'm just giving you an order of preference.
Right, and no, I was just curious because an overlay, it would be hard to distinguish whether you would be on the east side or the west side and how far in the west side you went, and so then just sort of,
We recognize that. And again, not to dump all over zoning and city attorney's office, we figured that they would figure that out. But that's exactly what we did.
right, okay.
Any other questions for Mr. Drescher? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Our next speaker in support is Heather Malby. Malabay?
Heather.
And if you can please make sure that you speak into the mic so the people in the back can hear, and that is adjustable if you need to adjust it.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I am Heather Malaby and a resident of Sandbridge Beach. There have been many changes to Virginia Beach, but a very important fact remains, and that's that our neighborhoods are zoned residential. Some of the problems occurring throughout the city are with the uses of the short-term rentals. I support short-term rentals with the suggested oversight that is given in alternative 2. I know the city will be following its own comprehensive plan, adopted in May 16, to maintain the harmony and compatibility of the neighborhoods. This is a good neighborhood policy and is in keeping with the logo, a community of a lifetime. Under Sandbridge in the comp plan, it states, it is the policy of the city to retain the existing low-density neighborhood character of Sandbridge. I know you respect the intentions of the residents to protect residential communities in which we have chosen to live. So as an individual, I'm just asking that you keep the comprehensive plan in mind as you go forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
I guess she didn't want questions.
Did anybody have any questions of Mrs. Malaby? I'm sorry, you took off before I could ask my colleagues. Anybody have any, maybe, anybody have, excuse me, any questions of the speaker? Don't see any. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Carl Eason.
Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Carl Eason. I'm an attorney with Walcott Rivers Gates, and I represent the interests of Sandbridge Realty. One thing I'd like to do is ask the people that are here today in support of alternative number 3 to rise rather than be heard individually, thus gaining the favor of at least Mr. Inman, who likes us to speak collectively. So if you'd stand and be recognized. Now that should cut it down just a little bit.
Wow.
You know, when I first looked at this proposition, I thought, you know what about option 4? Does anything have to be done? And many times you look at, if there's not a problem, sometimes you look for the solution. Do you need that? Do you need the regulation? I own property in the North End. I own property in Croatan. I own property in Sandbridge. And I think all 3 of those areas have absolutely different characteristics. I'm sorry. Usually no one has to tell me to speak up, but I will.
Well, it's because your back's to them, so that's,
I think that all 3 of those districts have various characteristics that are differing from each other. And we talk about an overlay district. One of the things that I first queried was, where would I like to buy my next development or investment property, and who's going to draw that line, and where are they going to draw it? Difficult issues. You guys, I appreciate so much the fairness that you exhibit in your deliberations. I know that individually, you've been called upon to be on the phone constantly. You've had independent meetings. But when it comes down to it, what you're looking at today is a balance between property rights and regulation. When I looked at the second proposition, conditional use permit, I thought of Mr. Kemp's office and the personnel needs to process all those CUPs. And I secondly looked at it from a point of view that if I were an out-of-town investor coming to buy some property at Sandbridge, and I put in my contract a contingency that I need to make sure I can get a CUP and rent this new home, that I'm looking at maybe, and no offense, Kevin, 120 days or more to process that. And would that have a chilling effect? Is it just as easier to go down to Kill Devil Hills where they don't have the regulation? So I sort of took that one off, and I said, if we have to consider one of the 3 things on the merits, let's try to deal with it in specific and concrete terms. Sandbridge is a pretty safe community. There's not a lot of police involvement down there. There's not a lot of difficulties. But every now and then, you see an event house that goes wrong. We had one in Croatan that was July a year or so ago, and somebody rented it out, no supervision. And next thing you know, you've got a bunch of intoxicated people at 2 in the morning on the street, and the police had to come deal with it. That's something that, as a resident, you don't want to have to tolerate, and it's something that Sandbridge Realty does not support, and they try to regulate it. So I looked at alternative 3. I speak in support of alternative 3, but there's 2 things I wanted to observe. First of all, I think there needs to be we look at the 1 rental contract per 7-day period. And I'm going to give you an example of how that may be a difficult provision. Somebody calls and they want to rent my unit for a period of 3 days. All right, that's great. Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Then somebody calls on Tuesday morning and says, hi, my family's coming down from Ohio. I'd like to rent it a week. That's more than 1 contract in a 7-day period. Rather than look at it number of contracts in a definitive period of time, we might want to consider an alternative of maximum, of looking at it as a term of minimum of times. How often do you want these properties to turn? You don't want it on a daily basis. I understand that. The comings and the goings are just too frequent. But the way that it's currently postured, you could have 1 rental for 3 days and then the place sit dormant until the next family wants to come down the following week and rent it for a 2-week period. So I think that has a very difficult application. And that application would certainly reduce the availability of the rentals, and it reduces the revenue. So that's one thing that I'd like you all to consider in making your recommendations. The second is occupancy. Many of the houses in Sandbridge are set up specifically for short-term rentals. I mean, after all, that's a destination, a resort destination. And when you walk into a given place, you're going to see twin bunk beds in a bedroom. Oops, that's 4 people in that bedroom. That's a violation. You go in there and you're going to see twin double beds set up, where 4 kids can go in there and same thing. Under this ordinance, that would not be appropriate. And so I think trying to make the maximum occupancy limitations as they're stated is perhaps needs some more thought on it. When you look at the Boca Code, when you look at the HUD, the Fair Housing Standards, they do it by virtue of square footage. They say for 1 individual, you have to have 70 square feet. For each additional person that you're going to put into that room, that's another 50 square feet. That's an objective criteria, and it's based upon the size of the space to be occupied, not merely number of bedrooms and a head count. The other things, when I looked under it and I see the registration requirement, not a problem. The payment of taxes, transient taxes, of course we ought to pay our taxes, and those that are escaping it through online media or otherwise is not to be sanctioned, certainly not by Sandbridge, not by me. Posting the city code provisions, absolutely. It's just as important to have those up there. It is don't dive in my pool, and the safety regs. Trash. Sandbridge provides, at a cost I might add to all the residents that rent through them, additional and supplemental trash removal. I don't want the cans out there. I don't want to have to come get the cans and drag them in and out. That's something that they do, and I think they take pride as a vendor, and I think some of the other rental houses that are in Sandbridge do likewise. So we're supportive of that. $1 million insurance, anybody that has a short-term rental and doesn't insure themselves has a fool for a client. Sign of permission, of course, and then we get to the events of 50 or more. What are you going to do with all those cars? I heard the observation that was made, and I've been down there in the summertime. I've seen it. They're parked everywhere, all over the ground, all over the sand, all over the gravel. You get to a point where there's only going to be a certain amount of on-site parking, and it does have to be on-site, because if it spills off-site, you got fire concerns, you got police concerns, you got rescue vehicle concerns, and you shouldn't clog the arteries with some special event. So seeing as something that says if you can't do it on-site, which is required, then bus the people in from some other site that you pay for. And we see that in very other large venues where there's too many people to be accommodated at a special event. So with those two particular modifications in mind, I think that section number 3 is appropriate with those two modifications. After I got to that point in my analysis, I started thinking about it, and I said, okay, number of people per bedroom. And I'm not sure who's going to be the bed checker. It's not going to be me, and I don't know who's going to, how do you enforce these things? And so making a rule without a realistic enforcement mechanism, I think, is something that we need to consider when we're making a recommendation, and certainly a legislative act. That doesn't mean that the goal that we're trying to achieve isn't an appropriate goal. It just means, how are we really going to go about doing that? How are we going to enforce that? I know that there's only a limited number of planning commissioners that can go and conduct these inspections, and so we take it from there. One other thing that I did cite is there has to be a responsible party, and I think the recommendation was after the 311 and the registration, be there in 30 minutes. I live in Croatan, I own a Corvette, I'm not sure I can even do it in 30 minutes. And if you do ask me to go down there in 30 minutes, and I pull up in front of the place at 12 in the morning and there's a bunch of intoxicated people out there, I don't feel personally equipped to go in there as a kung fu fighter and resolve that conflict. I would probably take the 311 and turn it into a 911. And secondly, I don't want to take Sandbridge Realty as an agent, not only for myself, but other owners down there, and put them into a position of potential harm where they have to go in and intervene in these situations where they're out of hand. If somebody is engaging that kind of behavior, that's probably for a professional to respond to. I don't see a lot of it, frankly. I haven't seen that as a problem. I've seen that as a limited occurrence. So again, I thank you for your service. I thank you for all the time. I know every one of you has taken a lot out of your time to deal with these problems, and I know this has probably had more activity than many, many other considerations. So please keep in mind alternative 3 with the modifications as I suggested. Having said that, I'm open for questions.
Any questions of Mr. Eason? Dave?
Well, first off, thank you for your time. And I agree with an awful lot of what you said. I do want to clarify one point, however, and that is that these alternatives, before we get too far down the path of thinking that these are some sort of dictative choices where you must choose between A, B, and C, or alternative 1, alternative 2, and alternative 3 is not the case.
Right, they're
And
just
so I am
considerations.
absolutely adamant about the fact that we are starting more or less from scratch. These are suggestions. We are not required to choose any of these 3 paths. City Council is not required to choose any of these 3 paths. They're helpful some ways, I think unhelpful in the means in which it was presented to us, because we have lots of people who are saying, well, I favor alternative 1 or alternative 2, as opposed to looking at the differences and saying, well, this is how I think we might come up with a workable and sensible policy that makes sense. And I think that's where we're really trying to go. And at the end of this process, I think that's ultimately what we're going to do. So just to clarify that, I certainly don't view it that way. I don't think that's a prevalent view on the commission.
They were not received by me in that way. What you do is you take that input, they are considerations for you to debate, and by virtue of our discussion, hopefully we come out with a reasoned approach at the end. So I appreciate the clarification. That's exactly where I was coming from.
Thank you.
Dee?
Hi, thank you. And I do like your perspective on all of this. Question I have for you, I want to just address the 311 number and your thoughts on it, and I agree, you can't get anywhere in the city in 30 minutes. But did you have any thought to, as the 311 number, I know that the city wanted to implement it 7 days, 24 hours a day, just so that there was a contact person, not so much for just basically parties, but trash, parking, et cetera, as just a contact person versus an on-point person on the property, so that they would just be able to actually talk to somebody, so that that person could actually make a phone call to the house. And I know that the real estate companies have a point person in general, I would assume. Is that correct?
They do.
Okay. That
And the
addresses that.
signage is posted, and the name and the phone number for the Realty
Where they need to
Corporation
call.
that's managing is posted. But the problem you have when you have that is that there is a crisis or a difficult situation ongoing.
Right.
And I wouldn't want to personally impose myself in a situation like that. And I certainly don't want to be responsible or liable for the acts of an agent on my behalf. So I really think that a 911 under those circumstances is more appropriate. Why would we need the 311? We're going to need a 311 when we say there's something rowdy or untoward going on that needs to be controlled, and you want the owner to take responsibility to control it. And I got that, and that should
Right.
happen in a perfect world. Unfortunately, we're not in a perfect world. And you may have somebody that owns a place in Sandbridge that lives in Ohio, and who is that responsibility going to fall upon? We're going to wake Mr. Moffett up at 2 in the morning and tell him to get on his, junior police outfit and drive down there to my place? I just don't see that as a feasible, practical solution. I think it's a good idea and concept. We should have responsible owners. But when I try to take some of these things that are wonderful in theory and put them into how will I put it into practice and how will I enforce that? There's one of the things I thought about, Ms. Oliver, was my fire alarm goes off at my house and it's a false alarm and I get a warning. And it sets off a second time and I get a significant warning. You know what happens the third time? I get to meet Ms. Wilson on a misdemeanor, because there's a history of creating that problem. And if we have people that have ownership in these problem houses, and we record that through a 311 call or otherwise, at some point, I don't know whether that's 1, 2, or 3 warnings or what it is, but at some point, that can be dealt with on a regulatory basis, and we have the legal system in place to do that. It's a nuisance. It's a waste of public resources. You just can't keep doing that, and with impunity, take your rent money and collect it and don't care about the rest of the neighborhood. So the enforcement, again, is a problem.
Thank you.
I believe that the 311 is not that they're wanting that person to rush down there and solve the problem, but to have somebody that's a contact person to give guidance on, should we call the police, or is this something you can handle? Because we don't want the police called for trash left in the street, or, those kinds of things.
Of course not. I think that, in my mind, when I looked at that 311, to me, that was the panic button. Something's gone wrong. Where's the owner? Because really, that's the first person that ought to come down and take care of it, be responsible, pick up the phone, call the tenant. But that doesn't happen often in reality, because you don't necessarily know who's renting on that given 7 or 14-day period. Sandbridge knows that. They have the contact numbers. So again, it's a question of, if you're not equipped to deal with something that potential violence or intoxicated people or stuff like that, I think that we do have to turn to our public services in that regard.
I think everybody's in agreement. I think everybody agrees with that. That's the impression I get. Everybody agrees.
I think you put innocent people in peril because you're confronting people that you don't have the skill level to do. And you may come upon multiple intoxicated people, and
Right.
sometimes they don't necessarily have the presence of mind to be reasonable at a given point. We've all observed that. Some of us may have participated in the absence of that.
How do you look at you?
All right. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, our next speaker is Catherine Miller.
Good afternoon. My name is Catherine Miller. I'm a resident of Virginia Beach. I would like to talk real briefly about Alternative 2, which is the proposal that I think most fairly looks at this issue. I do think that distinguishing between home sharing and short-term rental is a fair idea, and that is in this alternative. Adequate parking on site is important, and without this, cars park illegally on the street or in someone else's driveway. I have a house near me that has 12 bedrooms and is advertised to sleep 38 people. A few weeks ago, 24 cars showed up to this house. Now, they managed to squeeze and park 18 of them on the parking area, which covers the front of the house. That left 6 cars with no place to park. I think renters need correct and adequate information about city codes posted in the house so that everyone can see it, not just the person who signed the contract. On the issue of one rental in 7 days, for many years, weekly rental was the norm, and then most of the loud parties we were having occurred on weekends when the house had been rented for a shorter period of time than a week. Some people who own rental properties said, we need this off-season rental of less than a week. So I think the compromise of one rental in 7 days is fair. We're talking about a house, not a hotel. The proposed maximum occupancy limitation is in line with the state code and the state requirements. There are rental houses in my neighborhood that put 6, 8, and even 9 people in one bedroom. I'm not sure that's safe. I've heard it stated this will be hard to enforce. However, if this limit were put in place and the homeowner or the investor could no longer advertise their home for more than the stated occupancy, then these are online. It would be easy to check. The contact person. The homeowner is ultimately responsible for what goes on at their property. A great many of the houses in my neighborhood have owners that don't live in Virginia Beach, and there's also people and corporations who own 2, 3, 4, and 5 different houses. I'm not sure they have any idea what's going on in their property. If they've hired a management firm or not, a 24-hour contact person should be available. His name and number, this name, he or she, should be registered with the city and available to the operator manning the 311 number. They wouldn't necessarily have to show up. They would just have to decide what needed to be done. The special events permit, in my opinion, is hard to enforce without additional zoning personnel that's available on weekends when most events occur. The 3 events per year rule has been blatantly ignored around me, and there's no way to check on it. I'd like to see limits that are stricter. We have over 50 event homes in my neighborhood, and at 3 sanctioned events per house, that's a lot of parties. Thank you and the city staff for your work on the short-term rental issue for the past 2 years, and thank you for considering alternative 2.
Any questions of Mrs. Miller? Jeff?
For your specific case, the 6 cars that weren't able to park on site, were they able to legally park somewhere, or where do they typically go?
They parked in someone else's driveway.
Were they allowed to park in those other driveways, or did they just pick?
It seemed to me they just picked because they picked one, and then that ended up being someone who was staying there, and they had to move, and they just kind of went down to the next house.
Okay. Thank you.
Dave Redmond.
So what neighborhood is it that you live in?
Sandbridge.
Okay, thank you.
Any other? Thank you, Ms.
Thank
Miller.
you.
Okay, our next speaker is Doug Miller.
Good afternoon. Seen some of you before at the Planning Commission workshop. My name is Doug Miller. I'm a resident of Virginia Beach as well. We started renting here in the early 80s for family vacations, and we loved it so much that we bought our first vacation here in the North End, Virginia Beach, in 2004. And in 2008, we moved here when we retired. As residents, we didn't have a problem with the rental community back then. We understood when we bought that, rentals occurred, right? But about 5 years ago, we went from families renting for a week or more to busloads of people coming in to party for the weekend, in particular at these huge event houses. The character of our neighborhood started changing for the worst. And for the past 3 years, we've been lobbying to bring it under control. It was a shock to us that the city had no regulations for short-term rentals, and that the rental community was operating unchecked and with little accountability. We've heard doom and gloom scenarios from the business community if these regulations are enacted. Their predictions are greatly exaggerated. For decades, there have been short-term rentals in Virginia Beach. Investors and businesses thrived, and residents appreciated the money that flowed into the community for sand replenishment and other infrastructure upgrades. Then the recession hit, and investors and property managers got desperate and started turning our beachfront neighborhoods into commercial zones to keep their profits up. Unfortunately, when the economy returned, they continued to move toward more commercial activity and away from family vacations. They apparently don't care about destabilizing our neighborhoods and seem to view our homes as nothing more than cash cows. We've heard about property rights. But you know what? My neighbor's property rights stop where my property rights begin. That's why city ordinances are in place that outline what can and can't be done in residential communities to protect residents from abuses like we've been seeing the past few years. Investors and rental companies have complained that they won't make as much money if they're regulated. Every investment has risk, and I don't think it's the city's job to guarantee a return on investment. I recognize that short-term rentals are here to stay, and even though we can't turn the clock back 5 years, we can start regulating rentals so it protects our residents from further abuses. I appreciate the effort the city has put into this issue over the past 2 years, culminating with the proposed regulations. I don't feel they went far enough, quite frankly, but I do see them as a good compromise between what the residents need and what the investors and businesses want. I endorse Alternative 2 as a fair proposal that lets long-term investors continue to legally operate while giving the city the opportunity to control future short-term rental growth in our neighborhoods. Thank you for your time.
Any
Questions?
questions of Mr. Miller? Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Okay, our next speaker is Andrew Kowalski. Did I butcher that too badly?
Not too bad. No, it's perfect. Good afternoon, officers of the committee, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak and for your service in the community. Name is Andrew Glowatsky. My wife and I are new homeowners in Virginia Beach, and we participate in the short-term vacation rental market. And we've enjoyed the Virginia Beach community and people that we've met so far, and of course the beaches. I'm here to express my opinion and offer maybe some direction on how the commission could advise the city council. And specifically, I'm here to talk about item, it's 10 on the agenda, and it is item 14-2096, page 3, and it is provision 12 of alternative 3. Okay. So on alternative 3, where it talks about the number of sleeps per bedroom, we want to recommend 3 sleeps per bedroom plus 2 additional. So we thought that this was a little constraining the way it's currently written. And also, I want to address what's already been previously spoken, is the 2 reservations within a 7-day period versus 1 reservation in a 7-day period. Like I said, we're recent homeowners, and we have been able to rent for a 3-day period. And if somebody leaves on a Sunday and then somebody comes back on a Friday, if it's a two different renters, then that would violate that provision of 1 within 7 days. So that's why we're in favor of that alternative. So we don't see any negative impact for those 2 changes in the provision. The only other thing, like I said, we're new to the area, so I'm not sure if an economic impact study was done to review the potential revenue losses, with these provisions on not only the vacation owners, property owners, as well as small businesses and the growth of Virginia Beach. But oftentimes, when time is taken to consider these recommendations, unintended consequences are minimized at that time. We've had a positive experience so far this year, but we, in light of these changes, we think that alternative 3, with those modifications to those 2 provisions, it looks like number 12 and number 10 and number 12 of item agenda 14, it says 14, page 4.
Thank you, sir. Any questions of?
Can you
yes.
explain to me again what you're looking for with regards to the occupancy?
Right, so the occupancy right now, I believe, is looking at 2 sleeps per room plus a total of 4 afterwards, right? So what we're saying is there'll be 3 sleeps per room with a plus 2 after the total net times your bedrooms.
2.
Okay, plus 2.
Right.
So plus 2.
3 plus 2.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is William Brown.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Commission, and city staff. My name is Dr. William Brown. I'm a 32-year resident of Sandbridge Beach, and a member of a citywide group called Protect Virginia Beach Neighborhoods. Notwithstanding what some may have you believe, we are not here today to take away property rights. We are here to balance property rights, as one of the previous speakers said. People have a right to rent their house on a short-term basis. I agree with that. That's a property right. But the people that live there have a property right to enjoy their homes in a peaceful manner. One person has chosen to monetize the structure by renting it short-term. The other has chosen to use it to live in as a residence. In establishing this balance, the city must be mindful that they are doing this to protect the public health, safety, and welfare for all residential neighborhoods in Virginia Beach. There is a difference between these two uses of the home, and the city and the state recognize that by the mere fact that they tax the short-term rental of a home, 6% sales tax and an 8% transient occupancy tax, and they don't tax people that live in their homes. And I think this distinction is very important when you talk about regulating short-term rental use. These places that are used for short-term rental use in the zoning code are called lodging places, because just like a hotel or motel, they pay the same tax. They offer lodging for compensation to any transient. Alternative 1 does not treat residential neighborhoods equally. It gives unfair advantage to people who want to do a short-term rental in an overlay district compared to people who may want to do a short-term rental in not an overlay district. It also is unfair that people that live in the overlay district as their home are not given any chance to try to speak to the use of their neighborhood for this purpose. Alternative 3 is nothing more than the codification of what is now illegal activity. It says that while volunteer wildlife rehabber, as we saw today, a daycare center needs to come and get a conditional use permit, and I've heard nobody say that they're against that, but for some reason, some people feel that the short-term rental of a house, which is causing a lot of disruption, does not need it. Maximum occupancy, the 2 per bedroom is based on the Uniform Building Code. It's also what's being used all throughout the country and through the Commonwealth. There's no basis in fact for 3 people per bedroom. They're just using that number. They're getting that number by finding out how many people they got in there now and then backing into that number to say, well, if we use 3. It is a safety issue. If there is a problem in the house, then, you know, the more people you have, the more trouble you have. 1 rental contract per 7 day. Done?
Yes,
Okay.
sir. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Wait a minute. We may
Yeah, do you have any questions?
We may have some questions. Any questions for Dr. Brown? Ron?
I'll sponsor him if he will, if he could finish
Sure.
a couple comments he was making.
Absolutely.
Right. I think the maximum occupancy, the city needs to look at it as a safety issue. The more people you have in a house, the more chance you have of a problem if there is a fire or some kind of problem. The rental contract for 7 days, that is already a compromise. The ad hoc committee said there should be a 7-day minimum rental. And some of the realty companies said, oh, but the national average is 4 days for a rental contract. So they said, okay, you can do a rental contract for 4 days, but you can only do 1. This is going to help prevent this revolving door of rentals that are occurring in some of the neighborhoods. The Planning Commission has the historical precedent, the tools granted to them by the General Assembly and the Comprehensive Plan to recommend an ordinance to protect the private property rights of all residents, not just those who choose to rent their houses on a short-term basis. Who knows, by striking more of a balance, we may actually improve the residential neighborhoods. And that is the reason why some people do come and rent in these neighborhoods, because they like the neighborhood atmosphere. I hope, as the comprehensive plan states when referring to Sandbridge, many of the dwellings are rented to visitors who prefer a slower, quieter atmosphere than that experienced at the Oceanfront Resort. I don't think we want to turn our residential neighborhoods into the resort area. any questions. And thank you very much.
Could I ask a question?
Yes, Ron?
You heard, you were in the meeting this morning, I believe, and you heard us talking about parking relative to the number of bedrooms or size of bedrooms or size of building. I don't know what the common denominator is, it's probably bedrooms. Do you have a feel for that, or any kind of, if you formulate any opinions on how that might be approached?
Well, obviously, the number of cars you have has to be related to the number of people, the maximum occupancy that you're going to allow, I think. And I do see that you can control the maximum occupancy. As someone earlier said, you can go online and see if they're advertising these for more than what the maximum is. So I don't think that's a reason not to come up with a maximum. And if it is a reason, then why would you come up with 3? Like I said, I've researched this pretty extensively throughout the country. I've never seen any community where they say 3 people per bedroom, especially when the building code says that you should have a minimum of 50 square foot in a bedroom, not in a house, but in a bedroom
Well,
per
my
person.
question, though, is more about parking, and I guess the two are related, but my question is, have you thought any about parking?
Well, one thing I do think about parking, and I'm sorry, I did get a feel there. I do believe that part of the advertising and part of the rental contract should be how many parking spots there are at a given house. And I don't know what that number will be, but so that when people come down, they know ahead of time, we only can put 10 cars on this lot. And, the city has a definition of what a parking spot is, how many square feet. And so you could go out and you could check, where you want people to park on your property and divide it out and see how many spots you have. But I think that should be made, not just say they all have to be on site, but actually say with each rental contract or each advertisement, this is the occupancy and this is the number of cars that are allowed.
Thank you.
Yes.
Jan?
Are you saying that you think it should be occupancy just be 2 people per bedroom, period?
No, 2 people plus 4.
Plus 4.
And
Thank you.
And this has been all over the map. Some places are just 2 people per bedroom, some are 2 plus 2, 2 plus 4, 2 plus 6. I mean, but more than 2 people per bedroom is just not, there's no basis in fact for that.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else?
Dee?
Yeah.
So, Dr. Brown, you mentioned that you would prefer a 1 rental per week versus 2 rentals? And just to sort of clarify, being the fact that we do, even though we live in a neighborhood, I grew up in the north end, and so you're in a resort area, and so my father always rented our house on us. Kicked us out in the summer. But I guess and that was easy back then because most people took a 1-week vacation, but now you've got families where both the husband and wife are working, so they usually end up with not a full week's vacation. They usually end up with maybe a 4-day vacation. And so that's why I was just curious that to be able to do 2 so that you could actually rent over the weekends.
Well, right now in Sandbridge, and they'll correct me if I'm wrong, in the summertime, during the season, they don't rent for less than 7 days. Despite the fact that you're saying that families can't take a 7-day vacation.
Right, but when you get into the
But in the shoulder
seasons.
season, they traditionally, or I say most recently, have started renting on a 3-day basis, like a long weekend.
Just because of school and.
Right. And this compromise provides for that they can do the 3-day rental, the 4-day rental that CBS is talking about.
But you only wanted it once a week, so that would eliminate, well, I guess it.
Well, it would change it from being a hotel or a motel. I mean, I guess you could say there's no restrictions and let them do it on a nightly basis. I mean, I'm sure there's some people that feel that way, that, you've got a right to rent your home for as long as you want, maybe, on a nightly basis, maybe an hourly basis. I don't know. But you have to come up with some, and this is already a compromise, is what I'm saying.
Right.
The minimum 7-day rental is now you can do less than a 7-day rental, you just can only do it one time. And you're only talking about, like you said, in the shoulder
In
season.
the shoulder season, where they're looking to do the weekends to work around school schedules.
And that's relatively new. I mean, I've been down there 32 years. We used to say, when Labor Day came, yah-ho, the tourists have gone. We didn't have people coming in renting around us. So,
Thank you.
anybody else?
Other questions? David?
No, Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
I just want to note for the historical record that it was Mr. Brown who suggested rentals on an hourly basis.
Right,
Okay?
right. No, I'm not suggesting that. I did mention it, and I'll tell you why I mentioned it, David.
Hold on, before I wanted to
I
mention-
looked up the new ordinance that was passed in Lexington, Virginia, just passed in October. And they specifically in there say that the minimum that you can do, it's got to be a 24-hour period. So obviously somebody must have thought they're going to rent it on less than a 24.
That's probably due to the college versus living
Could
at a
be.
beach. I think those are two different
Well-
types of resort rental destinations versus somebody going to a beach and somebody going into
Well,
a college town.
could be. Yes.
David?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Brown and some friends and neighbors were kind enough to meet with me, and I appreciate that. Thank you, Bill.
Sure, thank you. And thank you all for your time.
Thank
Thank
you.
Okay, our next speaker is Donna Watson.
Always forget to move this. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Commission and staff, my name is Donna Watson, and I'm representing Protect VB Neighborhoods. We are a citywide organization and are concerned about the erosion of residential neighborhoods and the health and safety issues caused by short-term rentals. The city's comprehensive plan's vision says that, quote, Virginia Beach will be a city with vibrant, well-maintained neighborhoods where all residents have the opportunity to obtain desirable, safe, and affordable housing and enjoy a high quality of life, end quote. People have bought homes in neighborhoods with the expectation that they will be safe places to live, work, raise families, and retire. Allowing unfettered and uncontrolled short-term rentals, which is a commercial activity, adversely affects the quality of life and the feeling of safety in your own home. For over 2 years, city-appointed committees and city staff have looked at this issue and have held more than a dozen hearings. They should be commended for being so thoughtful in their deliberations. Since short-term rentals are not currently permitted by the city's zoning ordinance and therefore an illegal use of houses in Virginia Beach, it is imperative that the city do something to codify this use. In our opinion, Alternative 2 is a fair compromise that will allow those who are currently renting their houses as short-term rentals to continue to do so. New short-term rentals will have to get a conditional use permit. This will let people know what's going on in their neighborhood. With the grandfathering provision, there should not be a flurry of CUPs because those who are already doing it can continue to do so. Alternative 3 basically sets up an overlay for the entire city. This will drastically destabilize one of the best aspects of Virginia Beach, good neighborhoods. All three proposed alternatives recommend a maximum occupancy standard, which will help to ensure the safety of these rentals. Currently, the owner or management company establishes how many people can sleep in a house. In full disclosure, my husband and I own a rental house in Sandbridge. The house was a short-term rental when we purchased it, and one of our previous management companies decided that we needed more beds in the house. Without our knowledge or consent, they put in a 3-person bunk to increase the number of people who can sleep in the house. And get this, they charged us for it, didn't even ask us. Until recently, we were unaware that there were any safety guidelines that we should follow. We assumed that our management company provided that kind of direction. The proposed regulations of 2 people per bedroom plus 4 is in keeping with so many universally established building standards and what is considered reasonable in the Virginia Code and HUD guidelines. Parking should be tied to occupancy, and commercial tour buses, which are common, should not be an option. Many of the rentals in Sandbridge are over the reasonable occupancy requirements proposed in the regulations. I gave all of you copies of some of the examples. I hope that you have a copy of them. Many of these houses have 12 to 14 more people than the proposed common sense recommendations. Limiting rentals to only 1 rental in a 7-day period will help ensure stability in the neighborhoods. It's very unsettling to have a revolving door of people in the house next door. I only have 2 paragraphs, is that okay?
Go ahead.
In the house next door. In a situation like that, do you need to keep your doors locked at all times? The revolving door of strangers also plays havoc with such fine institutions as Neighborhood Watch. Are the people in the rental another crop of renters, or is it someone who's broken into the house? Requiring a contact person who can respond in 30 minutes is essential. There's nothing more frustrating than calling one of the realty companies and getting a recording or the maintenance person. Sadly, this still happens. Thank you for your time and attention to this very important issue. While I'm sure you've heard from many businesses and investors, the concerns of the residents of Virginia Beach should be given great emphasis. After all, we are the ones who live in this community and call it home. Thank you.
Any questions for Mrs. Watson? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the next speakers have checked both the opposed and support box. Robert, I'm sorry, Berdath? Okay. Your writing is almost as good as mine.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. I thought my meetings were long, so I'll try to be as short as I can. My name is Bob Brenley. I'm the owner on 321 Pike Circle, and I rent it all year round. I am here to say I want alternative 3, which is the change in provision 11 from 2 per bedroom to 4, make it to 3 to 2. And here's why. I have a house, it's 5,100 square feet. I have 6 bedrooms. Under the current provision, I would go from 21 to 16. And I look at it, I say, well, I had the house for 7 years. About half of my renters are repeat renters. When they come next year, they know I have, space for 21 people. They're not going to bring 16. So nothing will change on that front as well. Also, if you look at the revenue, obviously, that everyone will lose on that situation, and you're still going to have the same amount of people. They go to a website, they're going to see all the beds, everything there, and they're going to have 21 people. So, end result there. Also, as an owner, we have the option of changing the structure of our buildings. I have a garage. My builder came to me and said, hey, I could put a wall here, make it 2 more bedrooms. I have very large bedrooms. I can easily put a wall there, make it another 2 bedrooms. I can go from 21 to 26. So I just want you to understand, hey, I built this house. I'm not a rich man, but I worked hard. A lot of that I've done myself and with family members. And this would be a severe loss of revenue on my case. Also, if you look at, I think Dr. Brown mentioned something about 3 nights, 2-night rentals. I've been there 7 years. I don't think Sandbridge does. I never rented a 2-night. It's always been 3 nights. So I think actually you can ask Sandbridge. I think it's actually in their contract in that regard. And also I want to say for repeat, for provision 9, I would like the 2 per week. I get a lot of people Labor Day weekend, Memorial Day weekend, and that ends. They're out, Monday, Tuesday. I have other people come in, say, Wednesday, Thursday. So I think we should continue that for those people as well.
Thank you. Any questions of Mr. Brindley? Don?
You said you got 21 people?
21, yes.
How many parking spaces do you have?
Well, I got a 3/4 acre lot. I have a football field. The one parking complaint I had, I got a call saying there's all this parking, and then I called my other neighbor, and they said, oh, Bob, that's my church group. We're having a party for the church group. I mean, normally I get 4 families. If you have 6 cars, 7 cars, I mean, my driveway can easily handle, 10, 12.
So you got ample parking?
Sure do.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Brindley.
Yeah, thank you. Have a good day.
Okay, our next speaker is Larry Hurtova. It looks like H-U-R-V-A-T-A. Okay, so obviously I really butchered that one.
I'm a resident of Bay Lake Pines. I'm a retired structural engineer. You guys have probably been in buildings I've designed and driven across bridges
Sir,
I've
can you
designed.
please state your name for the record for them?
Larry Horvath,
Okay.
and I've got the dubious honor of being the chairman of the Bay Lake Pines Civic League Short-Term Rental Action Committee. I'm going to make this quick. I think I've talked to a lot of you all, a couple of you all at least I know, I recognize. We voted on the 24th of October at our heavily attended Civic League meeting. We don't want these things in our neighborhood. We bought into our neighborhood because we want to live among neighbors. We've developed long-term relationships. This is why we live in Bay Lake Pines. And there are other neighborhoods like ours. I know that people live there because they want to live among their friends and neighbors and people who know them. We don't want a different group of strangers in our home, in houses next to us, or across the street from us every weekend. We don't want that. So whether you pick options 1, 2, or 3, we do whatever you can to keep our neighborhoods the way they are. We like them. I wanted to answer a couple of the comments that were made. Being an engineer, you can quantify anything. If you want to maintain the character of a neighborhood, see what the average number of occupants in each house in the neighborhood is, and limit the short-term rentals to that. See what the typical number of cars in each house is, and limit the short-term rentals to that. Maintain the ambience of the neighborhood so that it feels like a neighborhood. We think that option 2 is the best option. And it brings some intelligence to this process. It brings professional judgment. You can take a look at Bay Lake Pines when some guy wants to monetize his house, moves out and wants to sell it to an investor. You all can look at it and say, hey, there's no short-term rentals anywhere near it. Let's disapprove this one. This is working wonderfully. The structure is in place. Let's keep it. Let's apply it. Because these things are as disruptive to our lives as a daycare center or a bar, I would think. As far as the argument I heard that a management requiring the 311 registration and setting up the 311, I think it's a great idea. It's an opportunity. I would rather start a company that manages and enforces the law on short-term rentals than maybe like a for-profit college. I think it's a great business opportunity to provide a management service. So I think the 311 idea is great. Requiring a 24/7 responsible party is great, and I think we need to have it. I think that's all.
Any questions for Mr. Horvath? Jack?
So how many would you say have come into Bay Lake Pines that you could possibly identify?
How many residents?
How many short-term rental?
We had one operating for two summers.
Okay.
And it was those were the horror stories. That was the parties and the fireworks and the cars all over. We have a house that's been advertised the house next to mine on one of the online rental, real estate services. They said right here on their website, you could potentially make this house they're trying to sell $5,333 per month by renting this entire home on Airbnb. So the real estate agents are moving into this, and we've got more houses. We have a second house that has been fairly quiet. It's been short-term rentals for the past 2 or 3 years, and it's strangers, and we've been lucky that it hasn't. The people don't like it, the neighbors don't like it, but they've been, it's self-regulatory. They kind of let it go on, but we don't want it. It was unanimous at our Civic League. We don't want these things among us.
Other questions for Mr. Horvath? Thank you, sir.
Okay. Our next speaker is Larry Corner.
Evening. Appreciate you taking the time to listen to what we have to say. My name is Larry Connor. I live in Bay Lake Pines also. And I attended your meeting earlier today and kind of messed up my speech here, but as Mr. Drescher pointed out, the North End and Sandbridge have always been short-term rentals And people buy in other neighborhoods like Bay Lake Pines or Lincoln Estates or Bay Island because they don't want that kind of traffic. For me to, Bay Lake Pines is zoned R10, which means businesses cannot legally operate in that neighborhood. Because these short-term rentals are taxed as hotels, the city is defining them as businesses. So for me for an STR to operate in my neighborhood, it'd be the same thing as me moving out of my house and turning it into a surf shop or auto shop. There's really no difference because you still would have the transient traffic. And the purpose of zoning laws is to assure a compatibility of adjacent properties, and STRs present several incompatibilities with neighborhoods. First of all, as Mr. Horvath pointed out, the people live in these neighborhoods because they want to live in a safe place with neighbors they know, and they get to have the relative familiarity of the neighborhood. Excuse me. Many times these STRs are rented as for a night or weekend for the sole purpose of partying. But whether there's a party weekend or not, the STRs still present the problem of increased traffic, excess trash, and general deterioration that usually accompanies non-owner occupied property. And this brings us to the issue of safety. Transient guests are less inclined to care about the general welfare of the neighborhood, and this includes problems of out-of-control guests, noise, late-night disturbances, drunk drivers, increased speeding and parking issues. Because the STRs are located in neighborhoods, it can safely be assumed that there are children playing outside, riding bikes, etc. So in addition to the hazards of the residents to the residents of increased vehicular traffic is the probability of the occasional criminal type as clients or guests of clients. Are the STRs required to screen prospective clients for history of pedophilia or violent crime? Or what about their guests? Property rights not only include how a property owners can use their property, but also how the use of that property affects the rights of other property owners. So the bottom line is, to us, is preserving the integrity of neighborhoods. Basically, SDRs change the neighborhood into a business district. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Connor. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Connor? No? Thank you very much.
I would like to add that I heard you talking about those weren't the only three options that you could consider, and I would suggest maybe a hybrid fourth or fifth option.
Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is Dell Young.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, you too.
My name is Dell Young. I'm a long-term resident of Bay Lake Pines, one of the best neighborhoods in Virginia Beach up by the bay. I'd like to do a Mr. Easton if I can and ask those who are supporting 2 to stand. If you're in support of 2, please stand. A lot of different colored outfits, aren't they? That's nice. Thank you. Let me begin by thanking you for volunteering your time and efforts towards helping us maintain the lifestyle here at one of the best cities we have. This has got to be at times a thankless voluntary position, especially when the direction of our residential areas are at stake. We know that this uncharted water of short-term rentals is being carefully watched here and throughout the state. What we do here is going to affect the rest of Virginia. We know that. It must be even more tough with so many of you having connections with the rental real estate market. Thank you, thank you, thank you for looking out for our neighborhoods. They are not places of business, but they are our homes. They're not generators of monies, but they're long-term investments for us. We would like to not have bi-weekly or even weekly transients in our neighborhoods if we could. But if you must allow them, at least let us know where they are. Alternative 2 requires a conditional use permit. Yes, it's another hoop for potential real estate investors to jump through. It's another form, it's another fee, it's more time, and we realize that this involves some of your time as well, your valuable time. But what it does, it lets us know, the rest of the neighborhood, by posting these conditional use signs, where these things are. It lets us know. It educates us. We want to know what's happening in the neighborhood, and it shows us which property these things will occur at. It allows us to help monitor that property as well. Having someone on call for the duration of a short-term rental also allows a neighbor some comfort, especially when visitors who have spent thousands of dollars for a fun time at the beach decide to set off fireworks, have an outdoor party, or just do things that they probably wouldn't do at home, but they would certainly do in a rental. I think Mr. Easton, I think, was the one who said that he doesn't want to come out in a junior policeman outfit at night at 2:30 to confront people that may be intoxicated. Neighbors don't want to do that either. Right now, we call 911. It takes time for the 911 people to get there. You should look at these things. By the time the police get there, usually things have dissipated. So we've already been up one night during the time. The next night, the same thing happens again and again and again. So there has to be something that occurs here that's some punishment for people who actually allow these things to occur. What we ask you commissioners to do is to recognize that bringing in short-term rentals impacts our single long-term investments, probably the largest that any of us will make, most of us here. As a 35-year veteran of Virginia Beach Public Schools, I know, as we all do, that full disclosure, support, and education makes us all better citizens. And I want to thank you again for volunteering your time and efforts.
Any questions of Mrs. Young?
Ms. Young.
Ms. Young, sorry, thank
That's
you.
okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is Kim Ragazzi.
Good afternoon. I'm Kim Ragazzi. I lived in Virginia Beach off and on since 1973, only leaving when the demands of my father's or my naval career required it. I graduated from Cox High School. My daughter's at Princess Anne, and I have a son at Old Donation School. I'm heavily invested both financially and emotionally here in Virginia Beach. I moved here for good in 2007. I love this city for its schools, its recreation, its low crime rate, but mostly because of its people. I too live in Bay Lake Pines, a neighborhood of about 300 homes. We're a friendly neighborhood. Every day you see the neighbors out walking their dogs, speaking with each other, and you see the kids out playing. It's what I treasure about my life. Had I known, however, that short-term rentals, or more accurately, hotel-like businesses would be allowed, with their commensurate noise, trash, and transient issues, I would have had second thoughts about investing here. I don't want to live in a hotel district, nor do any of my neighbors. That will change the tenor of our neighborhood. As you heard at our Civic League meeting, we had a unanimous decision against short-term rentals or against the overlay districts. However, we understand that if hotel-like businesses are a foregone conclusion in our neighborhoods, then it's incumbent that we find ways to mitigate the deleterious effects. At a minimum, I advocate that if an investor wishes to open a hotel-like business in my neighborhood or in any neighborhood in the city, they should be required to obtain a conditional use permit, just as any of us who wish to monetize our investment would. If I wanted to open a daycare, a museum, or a kennel, I'd be required to get a conditional use permit per the Virginia Beach zoning code for my neighborhood. I see no reason why a hotel-like business should be treated differently. We'd like to see no more than one rental per 7-day period. This will limit the number of transients in our neighborhood and allow us to better understand the changing dynamics of what a hotel-like business will mean for our neighborhood. There should be occupancy limits. There should be parking limits, which I think can best be addressed in the conditional use permit. A 24-hour number for a manager-owner should be posted in a location available to the neighbors in case there's an emergency or problem. The caller should receive a response, not necessarily in person. A phone call would be sufficient within 30 minutes, similar to what would occur if we had a complaint in any other hotel. I do understand the right of an owner to monetize their investment, but I and my neighbors also have the right to the safety and enjoyment of our home and neighborhood. These rules are hardly onerous, but instead lend themselves to neighborhood harmony and are in keeping with the standards relevant to other businesses that might operate in our neighborhoods like ours. Thank you very much for your attention.
Questions for Mrs. Ragazzi? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Patrick Keener.
I'd like to thank the members of the commission. I'm sorry, my name is Patrick Keenan. I'm the president of Siebert Realty in Sandbridge. And I'd like to thank the members of the commission for discussing this topic. I know this is kind of a contentious one, and would like to point out that my family's business has been doing short-term rentals in Sandbridge for approximately 50 years, a little bit over 50 years now. For 25 of those 50-plus years, we have done short-term rentals, meaning less than 7 days. We have advertised and accommodated 3-night rentals for nearly 25 of those 50 years. So it's not necessarily a new thing. I would like to point out, though, in general, that we do support alternative 3 with modifications, similar to what Sandbridge Realty had pointed out. And not to belabor the point too long, I'll just be brief, that we support 2 reservations per 7-day period as opposed to 1 reservation. We would also be willing to accept a minimum 3-night rental as an alternative to the number of reservations in a term. We would also support the 3 people per bedroom plus 2 limitation as opposed to the 2 people per bedroom plus 4. I would like to point out that the average number of bedrooms and properties that we manage is 5. So the number of people that would be different in those 2 plans would be a total of 3. 3 additional people would be allowed in a 5-bedroom house, average house, under the 3 people per bedroom plus 4 number as compared to the 2 people per bedroom plus 2. 3 people per bedroom plus 2 as opposed to the 2 people per bedroom plus 4. That is a tongue twister. In general, that's what we would like to support is alternative 3 with a couple minor modifications.
Questions for Mr. Keenan? David?
I'm sure you inspect the homes that you all rent.
Yes, sir.
Do you look at the parking just to make sure each home has sufficient parking? That seems to be the big topic.
Well, we
Really big
don't
topic.
have an advertised number of parking spaces. The parking is fairly easily evident. You can drive by and see the number of spaces. When we are made aware of somebody parking kind of inconsistently with how we should, we certainly address it.
Okay, that's my question. Okay, thank you.
Ron?
I think I saw some correspondence about the size of the signs, or your sign.
I
are your
put out there,
signs-
it's completely self-serving. That particular request is a request to have the size of the signage to be set at 2 feet by 2 feet as opposed to the 1 foot by 1 foot that was proposed, simply because that would grandfather in all the existing property management signs that are used in Sandbridge. So again, that's a purely self-serving thing, and I felt like maybe that wasn't necessary to bring forward.
Well, would you favor a phase-in of that? So that you eventually
Absolutely,
got
indeed.
to that?
It would certainly lighten the pinch as far as the cost to implement that change.
I see your trucks in the neighborhood all the time, moving around and whatever, and a lot of times I see them actually pull trash cans out and put them back. Is that something tell us how that works?
Indeed, as one gentleman indicated, we do orchestrate a private trash collection during the summertime. It's 19 weeks in the summertime where we have trash collected on Saturday. We do ask that the guests and/or the cleaners accommodate the movement of the cans to and from the street, but when that doesn't happen as it should, we will step in and put the cans where they belong. We do allow for time for that activity to happen without having to kick in, because I manage 350 homes. I have 5 techs in the field typically. That will take just a little while to move that number of cans, but we will consistently and steadily address it.
The city did I think somebody on staff did a pretty good detailed breakdown of number of bedrooms, baths, occupancy per bedroom, and they did it. I guess they must have pulled it off Sandbridge Realty site. And I'd like to see Seabird provide the same information or help the city assimilate this information, because it's very helpful to determine what the average.
I'd be more than happy to provide the information directly. All that information is always available on my website and can be, and it's up to date to the moment. Things
I'm
do
sure-
change. We have houses come on and come off, and we would have to regularly report to the city what goes on.
I'm sure you'd work with them on it. But I just
Absolutely.
want to mention that's something I think it could be very helpful to this group in making some decisions on parking and number of bedrooms and all that stuff.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
How would you feel about advertising on your website how many available parking spaces there are?
I would have no problems, and that was part of Alternative 3, that it would have parking all on site.
But on your website, just like you advertise how many would sleep, you could say, availability for 4 cars.
It would be
or-
helpful if the city were to define the size of space, simply because an F-150 takes more space than a Mini
Right.
Cooper, and, you don't want to get into too particular semantics, but we would like a definition on that, for sure.
Okay.
Any other, I've got one question for you. You said you managed 350 houses.
Approximately, yes, sir.
And if you had to just give us an executive summary of what is your biggest problem you deal with in the summertime? You got
golly, I don't want to get into particulars about individual properties, because it would be morally, most
Sort of
often it
plural.
will be a specific property-type issue. It rarely can be defined as a systemic problem that we have. I have heard the complaints about noise, parking, and trash for a number of years, and I have asked the city to give me some statistics on that, and there typically isn't much in the realm of statistics, because there's not much in the realm of complaints that get made to the city for that type of activity. It just, occasionally I'll get a call from a neighbor to say, hey, this folks next door, or they've got a garage band going on, and that's not cool. And we will go down and address that, absolutely. It's not necessarily a party going on. Mind you, I accept that the event homes can be problematic, and I would certainly encourage the city to guide that process. But we're more concerned about what the impacts would be to the short-term rentals and the overall investment made by a large number of people in the city that has been encouraged by the city for a number of decades. And we would encourage that the city be careful how they move forward with addressing that and regulating that, so that the impact can be minimized.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, our next speaker is Joan Davis. Okay.
There we are.
Sure she appreciates that. Everybody.
Well, now we know.
Thank you.
We may all need that break here in a moment, right?
Walk out for 1 minute, and that's what happens. Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Joan Davis, and I'm a 42-year resident of Sandbridge. I'm past president of the Sandbridge Beach Civic League for the past 7 years. I am on the Volunteer Rescue Squad for 30 years. I most likely know more about this than any of y'all here, since I am eminently familiar with what started it. I am addressing concerns from other residents of Sandbridge. I am sure you're aware that Sandbridge is unique. We are not like any other community in Virginia Beach. We have had weekly and daily rentals for over 50 years. We are not solely a residential neighborhood. We are unlike Bay Lake Pines, like they were discussing earlier. In fact, most people that finally move here from coming down for a short-term rental. What began this journey over 2 years ago was addressing concerns regarding event homes. The proposal in front of you today barely deals with these events, but has now morphed into restricting how we rent our homes. This places undue restrictions on our personal property rights. Sorry, I'm still out of breath from running back. I believe that if non-conforming use is sanctioned and taxed by a governing authority for years, that a right to continue the same has been created. Sandbridge rentals predate the city's CZO. Sandbridge short-term rentals were allowed by Princess Anne District and continued after the merger of the city of Virginia Beach. Millions of dollars have been paid on the Sandbridge rental houses in real estate taxes, hotel, motel taxes, sand taxes, flat taxes, service district taxes, and the tenants create phenomenal spin-off on tax dollars. We, at this stage of the game, would just appreciate, we just don't like extra restrictions placed on us. And we feel like we are kind of singled out as our little 5-mile stretch of beach. When you start looking at the 1,400 STRs that y'all are speaking of, we are half of that. So you're actually singing out a 5-mile stretch of beach when there's 450-some thousand citizens in Virginia Beach now. We are truly being singled out of this little section. And I would like to ask one more time, all those that are opposed to additional restrictions on Sandbridge or in general in the city, please stand up. And if you're in the back, please raise your hand. And I have hundreds of emails if you would love to see them, but I'm sure you've already seen hundreds. And I really want to thank you for your time in addressing this issue. Do you have any questions?
We might, Jan.
Well, I have a question. So you're not opposed to short-term rentals, you're opposed to the ordinance. Am I?
I am, yes.
Okay. 'Cause
I'm
when you
definitely
have
not
opposed
I'm
here,
not
I'm just
opposed to
trying to-
short-term rentals at all, no, because we've had them forever. That is why I moved to Sandbridge and why I like where I live. I love the tourists coming in and out during the season. I love all their day trippers that come in and out. I moved there for a reason. I knew where I moved when I moved there. I knew it was a visitor community, and that's what was going to happen when I got there.
So you are not in favor of any alternative, but you want short-term rentals just...
I really don't have that option, I'm sure, because we've given 1, 2, and 3. We weren't given D, none of the above. So I'm sure that, with that being said, that if we have options to consider, there are some that
that are worth considering that some people have already spoke about.
Okay, but I just want to make sure I understand, because you marked that you were opposed, so, but you're just opposed to the ordinances,
I'm
options,
opposed
not
to all the
opposed to
I'm
short-term
opposed to
rentals.
every ordinance as 1, 2, and 3 as they are presented.
Okay.
There could be some changes in them that would make it more reasonable for all of us to deal with.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
So if we were to come to some conclusions on an alternative 4, and would you then wish to have some input into that or review of that?
Well, I really don't think, I know that they've said they've had they've had plenty of public forums. Yes, we've had public forums on the beaches and waterways and on the ad hoc committees, and we've had all kinds of things. But we have not, as of yet, had a public hearing, except today, on this short-term rental proposal that has just been presented in November, over a holiday weekend when many people are not available to attend. And then not only attend, then we're going to have it immediately on the first of the year. City Council is going to be voting on this. I think that it's such a strong issue that we need additional time to deal with this.
So there's opportunity for compromise?
Yes,
but there's
correct.
also some additional vetting?
Yes.
That you feel would be apropos?
Correct.
Okay.
Other questions? Don?
You mentioned something about the event homes, what's your feeling on those?
Event homes, the reason we started this whole thing to begin with, and it got like it is like I said, it morphed from just dealing with event homes, which we thought, well, let's put some type of restrictions on making sure people park in the correct places, and that we have how many people come to the house, and if they need a permit, obtain a permit. And instead, it has just gone into taking away some of our property rights, which I think is way out there. I mean, it's just... Everything's different, including the Airbnb. If you look at your little red dot list that y'all have, the thing, it shows the big red dots, but it's only about a couple of hundred actual short-term rentals when you start counting those red dots. But it looks like that we are infected with rentals, and we're not.
So you think if some regulations were put on the event homes to prevent some of the problems they had to do?
What you've done, what you have
You
correctly done.
would be happy with that?
I think that there needs to be
But you
some
don't
type of
think-
thing. And if you want to know the truth, there aren't that many event homes in Sandbridge.
I don't think said a while ago there were 50 in her area.
Who did?
I don't know, some lady,
Well, then I think you better call the realty companies back up here, because I don't think that is correct. I don't even think it's close to correct. Because I don't think Seabird has about, 21? And Sandbridge Realty has in the 20s also. So that's about it.
We're close to 50.
Close to 40, but it's not 50.
Okay.
It's not there.
I got a question.
All right, thank you. Thank you.
One more question.
So your main issue is with the event homes and how they've impacted to Sandbridge, and Airbnb is not really an issue so much in Sandbridge. It's just in basically Bay Lake Pines is the one that's, and some of these other neighborhoods that normally don't have this kind of turnover rate, that are basically off of the beach, are impacted by the Airbnb online.
Correct. And one more time, if you look at your list, 40% of those are Airbnb on the little red dot things, which means we're totally different than any area in Virginia Beach and always have been. So I'd like you to take that into consideration.
Other questions? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, moving along, we have... Sarah Howick? You guys are really challenging my ability to for pronunciations today.
Good afternoon, I'm Sarah Hauk.
Okay.
And I live in Chesapeake Beach. I've lived there for 52 years. And just to state the record, Chesapeake Beach
Can you move the mic down a little bit?
Chesapeake Beach does not want event homes or short-term rentals. We are a military area, SEAL team, Navy, long-term residents, and we voted in our Civic League meeting we did not want these things. But we know they're here, we know we're going to have to put up with it, so we are going for Proposal 2 because we feel like it's a compromise between neighborhoods and homeowners who wish to run a business in our neighborhood. Proposal 2 calls for a CUP, maximum occupancy of two per room with 4 extras, quality insurance, 1 rental a week, and a contact person to be close at hand. Anyone that wants to set up a business in a neighborhood must get a CUP. This should apply to short-term rentals in neighborhoods also. If someone wants to use their house for a business, they must understand that their businesses totally change the quality and atmosphere of that neighborhood. Therefore, that homeowner needs to realize this and take their business opportunity very seriously. The CUP requirements makes the homeowner be accountable for the business. The occupancy standards are proposed 2 per room. They follow the state code. This is for safety reasons for the renters and the neighbors. Proposed 2's insurance clause is just a common sense thing. Proposal's rule for 1 rental per week is so important for keeping harmony with the neighbors. More than 1 rental a week would surely affect the neighbor's stress level, and I've experienced this, so please don't do that to us. Money for a homeowner should not outweigh the needs of the neighborhood. The other thing about all proposals call for a contact person, and this makes the homeowners accountable for their rental. Thank you.
Any questions of Mrs. Hauk? Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is Lee Crumbine.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
I have some pictures here so you can see exactly.
If you go the other direction and hand them to Marshall, that would be
you see exactly
terrific.
what I'm talking about. It'll help.
Thank you.
So hi, I'm Lee Crumbine. I want to thank you guys for your service. You've been here a long time. This is important work. In front of you, you have a package and a letter to express my great concern about the short-term rental ordinances. I own 2584 Sand Fiddler Road on Sandbridge Beach. I own one of these large homes. In 2018, we have 32 rentals signed up as of this December. Of those 32 rentals, 15 of them are over 24 people. This is a 10-bedroom, 10,000 square foot home. It's a beautiful oceanfront home that comfortably holds 36 people. Under the 2-sleep proposal, you would only allow us to have 24 people. We have 2 very large bunk bedrooms. In those bunk bedrooms, you can sleep 8 kids each. We have large double queen rooms where a mom and dad and 2 kids can sleep, and a pull-out sofa and day beds, and we have 12 full bathrooms. So my wife and I plan to retire here if we can still afford it after this one day. If you pass this ordinance with 2 sleeps plus 4, we will lose 15 of our 32 rentals, almost half of our rental income. And there are hundreds of houses that will be negatively affected if you do pass this 2-sleep rental rule. Our home was built in 2015. It rents well, and we only make 6% cash on cash. If you have a mortgage, you make a lot less than that. We would never have built this house with this 2-sleep ordinance on the books. It would be such a money loser that I could never have gotten a mortgage by income. If we lose those 15 rentals, we would have to sell our house when we did sell it at a loss. We tore down a dilapidated house that was not kept up, that was an eyesore on Sand Fiddler Road. It was unkempt, and a place that vagrants broke into from time to time to party at night. There's a picture of it underneath Blue Horizon. The house we built has an indoor pool, an outdoor pool, has a theater room, an exercise room. It comfortably seats 36 people in the kitchen, and many, many more amenities. And I think that I understand what the people are doing, why they want their little sleepy community back, but this is a wonderful addition to Sandbridge. We built this home after staying in Sandbridge 5 years in a row with my extended family. and we had 32 people each. We would have never come to Sandbridge to rent a house if we were going to do this.
To wind up, you got the.
I'm almost done.
All right, one, quickly.
So it supports a lot of people. We hire a lot of people all year long, and the people that come visit us go and spend all their money all over town, and all of those people's incomes are going to drop because this is going to affect everybody's home. We pay $25,000 a year in taxes. One extra policeman on Sand Fiddler Road would solve a lot of the residents' problems, all the legitimate issues. I mean, that's all it would take. Everybody knows this. You don't have to damage us by making these regulations to fix their issues. You can fix it easy. One policeman would do this. I'm not a Johnny-come-lately here. My family has owned property in Virginia Beach since the 1930s. We've been vacationing with my extended family at 110 58th Street for more than 75 years. And we love Virginia Beach. And we decided to invest our hard-earned life savings here instead of in the stock market or in real estate investments. And vacationers from all over America are seeing what we saw and seeing what my grandfather saw in 1938 when he built his first house here at 110 58th Street. And if you feel like you have to act, please allow 3 sleeps per bedroom plus 2 instead of 2 sleeps per bedroom plus 4. Please don't recommend this as 2 sleeps per bedroom. It will hurt so many more people than you will help if you do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Crumbine? Jack?
Did you address parking on, how do you address parking on?
I didn't address parking. Our house easily parks 15 cars. We made it that way, which is plenty for our people. Those people you see in there, they came from Michigan. That's the kind of people that rent our house. These aren't partiers that are going to burn down the house. We don't want that any more than anybody else does.
David?
Do you use a realty company, or do you run it yourself?
I use Sandbridge Realty.
Okay.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is Mary, oh my God. Okay, I'm really gonna butcher this one, sorry. Mary Geyers Indole, I don't know. Thank you.
You say, Mary, please show up. Grivendoulas.
Mr. Chairman, Planning Commission, and staff members, my name is Mary Grivendoulas, and my husband and I have lived in Sandbridge for over 30 years, and we care very much for the future of our community. I have participated in most public hearings in past 2 years concerning short-term rentals, and I appreciate the efforts of the Beaches and Waterways Commission and the Ad hoc Committee to make the recommendations to the City Council, the city staff, by providing the alternatives before you today. The city's vision, in accordance to the comprehensive plan to maintain a high quality of life, is being questioned by its citizens when existing zoning ordinances are not being enforced concerning short-term rentals. Sandbridge is zoned residential. In the past, during these meetings, I have heard time and time again, the toothpaste is out of the tube. Granted, but we have to find the best solution to coexist with these rental platforms. The status quo has proven to be disruptive and destabilizing for our residential communities. Therefore, it is not a question of politics or us versus them. It is a question of protecting the sanctity of a residential environment. No one is going to want to live in any location throughout Virginia if these short-term rentals are not properly managed. We all know that. These concerns are resonating throughout the whole city and not just the beachfront communities. Alternative 2 is a fair compromise that assures the citizens of Virginia Beach They have a voice in participating in the future of the short-term rentals and are allowing for people who are currently renting their houses to continue to do so. Alternative 2 also protects the neighborhoods from multiple short-term rentals in a 7-day period. It provides only one rental per 7 days, which protects and controls the neighborhoods from having a revolving door in the house next door. Alternative 2 provides for health and safety requirements and is consistent with the Virginia Uniform Statewide Building Codes. These codes use the size of the bedrooms to establish a maximum occupancy. Requiring a maximum of 2 people per bedroom plus 4 will make it easier to determine how many people can safely sleep in a short-term rental. It also addresses the importance of posting city ordinances in each registered short-term rentals to educate and inform rentals of the city's ordinances, especially if further action is needed when violations and reported the city's established 311. I have just one paragraph. The requirement for the owner or agent to respond within 30 minutes, or what's logical, is the utmost importance. This will guarantee the responsible owner and agent to emphasize and enforce these ordinances to their renters from occurring when possible. The outcome will be a positive for our neighborhood. In summary, we must not limit ourselves to the particulars, but look at the big picture and compromise. And Alternative 2 assures its citizens throughout Virginia Beach to have a voice and to coexist with short-term rentals. Does anybody have any questions? I'll be happy to do the question on parking. I live there, I live on the ocean front, I see it all the time, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
No questions, thank you.
No questions? We have a problem.
Kathy Damian. Again, Kathy Damian.
Hi, I'm Kathy Damon. I live in Chesapeake Beach. I have stayed in Airbnbs. It was a nice experience. But I think that the main focus needs to be decency, treating each other well, just like where you'd want to be, the house you'd want to have next to you. The gentleman from the realty company who scheduled his own management pickup of trash, that's a great thing, and obviously he's aware that that's an issue. The parking is an issue. The noise is an issue. Any illegal acts have to go to the police. I don't think it's something that the gentleman who was being facetious about trying to go somewhere in the middle of the night, if there's an illegal activity, needs to be addressed by the police. But any other thing needs to be addressed by a property manager, management company or person. I worked in a hotel for many years. That's the type of arrangement it is. You have a management team. They take care of it. If it can't be taken care of that way, then it gets taken care of in the next level up. And just like the statement has been made about property rights, we as residents have property rights. The people who want to rent their homes have property rights. You all have rights and obligations to us as citizens, and you also have an obligation to the city council to recommend. So I think that we all have to be serious here and treat each other well.
Thank you, Mrs. Damon. Any questions for Mrs. Damon? Thank you.
Yeah, I have one.
Jan.
So are you in favor of any of these options, or are you in favor of a hybrid option, or none at all?
Well, I was pleased to hear that the 3 options were not the only ones. And obviously, we're in the throes of a huge project here. So if there's time to create another option based on what you've heard and based on what makes sense to us as human beings toward each other, I think we need to work on it a little more.
Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is Jim Reeves.
Mm-hmm.
You what?
It's so hot, must be on. Yeah.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having us today. My name is Jim Reeve. I am here today as the acting current president of the Sandbridge Beach Business Association. I am an owner of 2 businesses in Sandbridge. I am a homeowner in Sandbridge. That home is used both for an extended family vacation home and for rental purposes. That home is currently on the market, but it is still currently owned by us, and we do continue to still rent it. We've heard a lot today. I'm also here as a current council member. I sat in that seat for 4 years as a Princess Anne District rep. And I know sometimes you guys, we all get blindsided by issues. You don't think there's that big of an issue, and all of a sudden, somehow the hornet's nest gets spun up. And a lot of concerns like, what is the problem? How do we fix it? As commissioners, as council members, we want to fix problems. As a business association, we understand that rules and regulations need to be put in place. There's a level playing field. The Sandbridge homeowners have been paying their taxes for 50 years. We're the only community I know in this country that has self-funded their beach sand replenishment. That's been done because the real estate appraisal values have gone up because of the Sandbridge resort community. But we are a resort community. Neighbors live next to rental houses, and there can be conflict sometimes. This issue really started coming to light about 3 years ago when the event houses came online. At that time, I kept quiet. I have a conflict of interest. One of my businesses is the Baja Restaurant. I'm a B4 zone property. I host events. I host weddings. I host reunions. I host wakes, memorials. I host everything. I'm held to the standards of a business. I have to have ADA bathrooms. I have to have ample parking. I have ample fire exits. That's okay. The event houses got a little ahead of themselves. Certain houses would rent time and time and time again. I wouldn't want to live next to that house. I don't think anybody would want to live next to that house. That's why you saw in the last 2 years, the real estate companies realized what was happening, and they voluntarily pulled back. There was not a city rule that made them pull back. They pulled back to try to be good neighbors. And I think what you've heard from both Siebert and Sandbridge and the other real estate companies, they understand to operate in Sandbridge, we have to be a good neighbor. And a lot of people are concerned about, oh, who's going to be renting this house? What is their background check going to say? Today, in my home I rent and own, I could have a party tonight. I could have a party tomorrow night. I could invite 200 of my best and unknown friends. You are not going to do anything about this. These rules and regulations are not going to fix people's conduct. It's up to people being good stewards. I believe the real estate companies have done that in the past. If you look statistically at calls for service in Sandbridge, they are extremely low. Much lower than the oceanfront, much lower than a lot of parts of Virginia Beach. Are there problems sometimes? Yes, there is. But I believe the community activists that are in there, the people that run these properties, want the best for the community. They live there. Their investments are there. Their families come there. From a business perspective, I support these families. I support the people that come from Michigan, from Ohio, from Chesapeake on a weekly basis and a 3-day basis. I understand I'm out. Would anyone allow me a few more minutes?
I'll allow him.
Thank you, sir. My final point is, it's starting to drive a wedge in towards Sandbridge. And if many of you know, that have known me when I was on council, we had some big issues that put wedges in Sandbridge. I support, and the business association supports, meaningful, realistic regulations, much like they've been put in place for option 3. We do think 3 per bedroom is more sufficient based on the current homes. We do think that 2 rental periods per week is adequate. Mainly for the shoulder seasons. I do most of my weddings in the shoulder seasons. It's a great place. In fact, the city for many years boasted Sandbridge as a place to come for a destination wedding. And only because of a certain amount of event homes, which some of them are now going offline because they realized they were truly just investment owners. They just wanted to turn and burn. We don't want that in Sandbridge. I've been coming to Sandbridge since the mid-'70s. Many people have been coming there as long, if not longer. We've grown into this. There's going to be some growing pains, and I believe we can work constructively to find a solution that meets 90% of the people's request. Some people are just never going to be happy. We didn't know that. But we have to listen to them. We have to be respectful of them. We have to make sure we put in regulations that are not overbearing. I'm concerned some of these regulations, what's next? Are you going to start telling homeowners they can't have parties? Some of the worst safety incidents we've had in Sandbridge, and one of my businesses opens at 9 a.m., the other business closes at 2 a.m. I'm literally in and out of that beach 24 hours a day. I know what's going on. I'm in the very south end of Sandbridge, so I go through the entire beach. It's not as bad as you may hear it is. We've had situations. The worst party that I know of the last year that include gunfire was a homeowner's grandson that came into the house, had a house party, it got out on the web, and it was a free-for-all. That's a safety issue, that's a police issue. That's not because they rented it to the wrong people from Michigan. So please, as you push these forward to the council, please be aware that we want to be cognizant of everyone's concerns, but we don't want to be overbearing on what we put in place, because many regulations just lay on top of the next one over, and we don't really go back and review where are we now and how we constrict ourselves potentially. Sandbridge is a very much a tax-positive community. We want to keep it that way. We want to keep it for families. As we started a group recently, Sandbridge should be for everyone, and we want to maintain that. Thank you very much.
Any questions of Mr. Reeve? Thank you.
Thank you.
The secretary has,
Mike, you have
I'm sorry, Mr.
Sir? Mr. Reeve?
Yes, sir.
I was going to ask you, how's having all the experience you have in Sandbridge in many years, how do you think trash and parking should be handled when either by management companies or individuals who are self-managing?
I think right now, because I do own a rental house that's managed through Siebert, Sandbridge pays for a secondary pickup on Saturdays. I don't see a lot of trash issues. In fact, one of my issues that I started as the Sandbridge Beach Business Association is we're the ones who petitioned to get the blue and the tan cans out on the walkways so we'll have less trash on the beach. We did that as a voluntary basis. Now we're coordinating with the city. We're the first beachside recycling in the entire city. We started that in Sandbridge. I personally, what I see, don't see trash that issue. Obviously, there's always situations. People put the can out, it's a windy night, it blows over, there's an issue. We should fix it. I think Sandbridge and Seabird Realty and the other companies always want to make amends to clean up if there's a problem. No one wants a bad looking area. Parking can be an issue. I believe parking should be required on site. There are times been tour buses that come into Sandbridge. It's not a routine basis. It is disruptive. When you drive down a street to see a big motor coach parked in front of a house, it doesn't feel like the family vibe that what Sandbridge is. So I think there should be regulations about parking, but for the most part, I think it's been taking care of itself because once again, if a certain house is a problem, as was mentioned earlier, it should be made aware to the management company. More importantly, the owner should know to make sure that his or her home is being managed the way they want to be still a good neighbor. Because we talked about, who's going to be renting this house next to me? Well, who's going to be buying the house next to me? We can't pick our family, we can't pick our neighbors sometimes. It's all about trying to do what's right. And I believe the professional companies that are in Sandbridge are trying to do the right thing. I think the event houses did get a little ahead or get a little too extreme because they got so popular so quick. And the beat in the city, if you look back at marketing, we actively marketed Sandbridge as a resort destination. Now, once again, I have a conflict of interest. I could say get rid of event houses. That would make the Baja a more reasonable spot to come. Thankfully, I'm already booked. I only do one wedding a day. So that's not it. It's fair and reasonable use of your property, and it's being a good neighbor. And I think trash is being dealt with, and I think parking should be addressed. I think you should, based on the size of the house, you should be able to show that you can park those number of cars on the property.
Do you only do one wedding a day? You have more requests for more than that?
I can do more than that, but if you ever dealt with a bride or a mother of a bride, they deserve your all your attention for that one day. It's their day.
Any other questions for Mr. Reeve? Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much for your time.
Before we proceed, the secretary has informed me that we have just hit a halfway point on speakers. So I'd like to suggest that we take about a 5-minute, you can stand up, stretch. We probably need to stretch a little bit, just 5 or 6 minutes, and be back in here because we're going to start in about 5 minutes.
Can we start without Barry?
Yes. Madam Secretary, would you please call the next speaker?
I will. It looks like we've lost a lot of people, so if they don't come, we'll just skip over them and move on and come back to them. Andrew Roper.
Keep going.
He's coming.
Oh, there he is.
And we really appreciate you all taking your time to come today. If what you are about to say you've heard more than one or two or three times, if you could give us sort of an executive summary, because quite literally, we've got as many people left to speak as we've had speak. So we're just trying to keep our eye on the clock. Thank you, sir, for coming, and proceed.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, and city staff. My name is Andrew Roper. I am the current president for the Sandbridge Beach Civic League. I'm here today to address the recently submitted short-term rental ordinance proposals that the city staff created in response to our community's request for some assistance with the excessive activities occurring in some rental properties that has been referred to as event homes. Since we brought this item to the attention of City Council, we have seen efforts by other members of our community to take the event home issue and conflate it to include all short-term rentals and attempt to enact stringent regulations to stifle any growth or continuation of this real estate activity. This latest ordinance proposal is just such an offering to their liking. While this group of citizens will publicly claim that they are not against short-term rentals, privately, this is their mantra. Our only official position on event homes was to ask the city to enact some sort of permitting process that would enable some accountability from the owner, their realty representatives, and the renters. It was explained to us that there were no current ordinances surrounding short-term rental activities and that the state would need to get involved before the city could do anything. Now, here we are discussing this latest piece of draft legislation. What is being considered is a far cry from what we asked for. The city will claim that this ordinance addresses all the issues that they have heard from the public. Sure, if you handpick a committee of persons who are against short-term rentals, and you task them with holding hearings for the public that occur in the middle of the day, and you hear from and see the same faces saying the same things at each hearing, then I would imagine anyone would only come to one conclusion, that short-term rentals are the worst activities that the city has ever allowed to occur. They would have you believe that there are constant noise disturbances, that property is being destroyed, and neighborhoods are being decimated. They would have you believe that these renters have no respect for the communities in which they are staying and no regard for the people around them. Well, if that's the case, then why do people keep coming back? Why do vacationers eventually buy and move here? Why is there continuing investment in this community if everything is so terrible? As the largest and most active civic league, representing nearly 1,200 to 1,700 homes in Sandbridge, our community is one that will be impacted most by this legislation. Since we provide nearly 17% of the city's revenue and taxes, wouldn't it seem prudent to get opinion from this community? Our Civic League's procedural rules don't allow us enough time to properly deliberate this complicated legislation. At the earliest, we would have a position on this matter in the middle of March. There are so many things to consider with this legislation that have far-reaching implications that we believe haven't been realized or even discussed. We need to discuss the one rental contract limitation, the maximum occupancy limitation, the what we are calling 3 strikes and you're out rule, the need for liability insurance, and a requirement that the owner or owner's agents be the first respondent to citizen complaints. We have many questions surrounding these issues. For example, is the city intent on stifling business? Are they intent on seeing individuals and businesses lose money? Does the city want to see its revenue stream decrease? If no, then why the one contract per 7-day limitation? Why not 2 instead? That would be more flexible while still controlling the revolving door concerns of the city. As members of the President City League, do I get 10 minutes?
You are a Civic League president, yes?
Yes, sir. So, how would maximum occupancy be enforced? What would happen in terms of a violation? What is the real purpose of this? Our estimation is this will only deter families from gathering together to enjoy each other's company under one roof. Again, the city will lose revenue. Are we really expecting ordinary citizens to become enforcers of the law and put themselves potentially into harm's way to address a criminal complaint? It's one thing to ask them to address parking or trash, but it's something else entirely to ask someone to step into a situation that could quickly escalate out of control. We have law enforcement for a reason, to enforce the law. Citizens should obey the law, and the police and courts are there to enforce it. If someone wants to assume risk when renting their property and doesn't want the extra cost of additional insurance, shouldn't that be their right? After all, this is the biggest complaint about the Affordable Care Act, and we see this legislation right in lockstep with the same mandate to buy insurance. The country didn't like it then, and we don't like it now. And most importantly, the 3 strikes and you're out rule. Will adjudicated violations term out? Will there be a review or appeals process should anyone get their registration revoked? Will said restriction apply to the property in perpetuity, or will it revert when ownership or management changes? Even the draconian state agency known as the DMV is more lenient with respect to keeping or reinstating your license, and more people die in car accidents than they do from ordinance violations. These are all valid questions, and these are not only the beginning. We need time. There is no hurry. The State Assembly is not waiting on us to get back to them. Our own delegate, Barry Knight, has confirmed this. Yet, city staff will have you believe that there's some expectation by the state for us to do something and get it done before their next legislative session. So I thought to give them the benefit of the doubt and wonder why they might be saying this or to what extent this could be true. Suppose for a moment that the state is waiting on us because other localities want to see what the largest city by population and land area has decided to do regarding short-term rentals, and that they'll use our legislation as a template for their own. Well, then wouldn't it make sense that we get it right? Wouldn't we owe it to them to do our due diligence and properly vet this out and hammer out all the details? I have been authorized by our Civic League to formally ask for a delay until March on this matter. This is my request. I trust you will do the right thing. Thank you very much for your time.
Any questions of Mr. Roper? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I'm gonna take a minute to do something that I've not done since I've been on this council, but I want to recognize somebody in the room. Not gonna ask him to come up here, but this ordinance, proposed ordinance, addresses the entire city of Virginia Beach. But it seems like the audience today and what we're hearing, the biggest impact seems to be on Sandbridge. It certainly affects other neighborhoods. But I want to take the opportunity to introduce to you all, many of you probably have met him but don't know, is Harvey Lindsay. His family, his dad started Sandbridge in 1953, and Harvey's with us today. Would you please stand, Harvey, and wave and say hello? Harvey sent me a nice letter and told me that when he was in Korea in 1952, in the trenches, his dad sent him a note and said, we're going to create this new project called Sandbridge. And of course, when he got back, his family and I think his brother-in-law participated and built Sandbridge. So I couldn't not honor Harvey. I worked with him for almost 15 years, and he's one of the finest gentlemen you'll ever want to meet. So thank you, Harvey, for coming out, and we'll get back into the program.
All right, Chris Conover.
Good afternoon. My name is Chris Conover. I moved to Sandbridge with my family in 1977 when I was 11 years old. I grew up in Sandbridge. I have also worked for Siebert Realty for 35 years, and my mother was a sales agent there as well. My mother has also owned one of the main businesses in Sandbridge for over 20 years. My family has always considered Sandbridge home and cares about all aspects of the community very much. Because I have lived here and work here, I have the benefit of experiencing both sides of this issue. Siebert Realty has a staff of 44 people. One of those 44, 10 of them live in Sandbridge year-round, and another 8 have lived here year-round at some point. We are not just outsiders who go to work here and leave at 5 o'clock. We are true members of the community. Some important information I wanted to bring up. I, too, agree that instead of one rental in 7 days, we need 2 rentals to allow for the weekend rentals, a 3-night minimum that we require. These owners do not just use this as extra money. They also use these off-season rentals to maintain the properties. I also wanted to mention that the extra tax that is charged to our renters is used towards sand replenishment, which is very important to all residents in Sandbridge, not just to the rental owners. And some people might not know, but during the summer months, we have a staff member at our office until 11:30 p.m., 7 days a week, to handle any problems that arise with our rental houses. And we also have an after-hours pager year-round to deal with any issues. They do not have to wait until the next day. We have someone on call. Losing any rentals will also affect the businesses not only in Sandbridge, but in Red Mill, Strawbridge, the contractors that work on our rental houses, and other businesses in Virginia Beach where our guests spend their money. We care about Sandbridge. This is not just a job. We are not just interested in the rental side. We are and have always been interested in the community as a whole. Thank you.
Any questions of Mrs. Conover? Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Wally Damon.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
My name is Wally Damon, D-A-M-O-N.
current president of the Chesapeake Beach Civic League. I lived in the Shore Drive area 6 decades. I've lived in the most of that in Chesapeake Beach. I've been involved in the Civic League for more than 3 decades. I'm going to be president for 17 more days, and then I'm going to move on. Yeah, move on to other things, Dave. The first time I ever heard of anything like this was a few years ago when my friend, and I won't say his last name, but his initials were CH, and he and I built houses in Sandbridge on Sandpiper Road and Sandfiddle Road. And when I first saw him after many years, he could not wait to tell me how much money he was making on the house that he was adding 3 bedrooms to in Sandbridge. He had a 3-bedroom house. He was renting it for $3,000 a week. And he told me that for the summer. Then he said he couldn't wait to do the 3 more bedrooms that he was building in Sandbridge on this house so he could make $6,000 a week. And he went like that. It's all about the money. So I got to thinking about that, and I said, I sure am glad that's not happening in Chesapeake Beach. Well, that speedboat lost its driver off the Atlantic Ocean, and it has come around the bend around Fort Story and into Chesapeake Beach where we live. And I really didn't realize it until I got a phone call from one of my neighbors, and this neighbor said, you should go down and check this out, Wally, on Ocean View Avenue. So I got in my car and I drove down towards Ocean View Avenue past Junior Market, and I saw a young man drinking something out of a paper bag and walking in the middle of the road. He wasn't walking on the side, he was walking in the middle of the road on Lookout Road, and he turned onto Fentress and was walking towards Buoy 44, which some of you understand used to be called Alexander's on the Bay. And I stayed back a little bit, and I'm president of the Civic League, so I'm going to get these phone calls from people all the time. And I should have told this lady, you know, you should call the police, but this guy got down to the roadway right there, and he turned left right in front of Buoy 44, and he was walking up the street, and I couldn't see over the crest of the hill very well what was going on, but I could hear it, even with my bad hearing. And I got over the crest of the hill, and I saw, I mean, at least 50 people, if not 75 or 100 people standing in the roadway. And then as I got closer and closer and closer in my car, I saw that half of them were sitting on the roadway, sitting on the road. So, you know, it's quite a bit different where I live in Chesapeake Beach on the south end, down closer to Shore Drive than it is there. But, you know, this is something that has to be regulated. We can't put it on our police department, you know, to take care of this. It's very burdensome. You know, it's like something that's gone too far too fast. And if we put this on our police department and put this on our fire department and our ambulances, you know, we haven't done our job as citizens of Virginia Beach. And you know, I come down here once in a while to speak, and so I thought that this was important enough to speak on. And as president of the Civic League, we can't always be opposed to everything that's going on in this city. We can't do that. We've got that bad reputation for always opposing something. And we did not oppose the new houses that were being built on Shore Drive as they are right now, because I think that it will add to the value of our home values. But this thing has gotten way too far, too fast, and somebody's got to throw the anchor out on that speedboat. So thank you very much. I very much appreciate you guys doing the work that you do on this commission.
Questions for Mr. Damon?
I have a question.
Jan?
Only because I'm just trying to keep track here. So are you totally opposed to any short-term rentals in your area, or are you in favor of one alternative over another? Or
Well, our vote in July of 2016 was to totally oppose the event houses. However, my personal view as a resident of Chesapeake Beach is that it needs to be regulated. You know, going to this 2 persons per bedroom thing, I think is a good idea. But again, I mean, it's all about the money. So those of us who have lived there for a long time, we need some help, that's all. Thank you very much.
Regulation with compromise.
Yes.
Don Horsley.
You didn't finish your story. I won't know what happened to these people sitting in the street when you were going along.
Well, you know, honestly, Mr. Horsley, I got down there, I got close up to them, and I was just about to put it in neutral and in reverse, and they got out of the way. They actually got up out of the street and let me come through. And nobody was kicking my car, and I have an antique Chevelle, so nobody was kicking it or anything like that. I think they just wanted to look at the car, but I wanted to see what was going on, see it for myself, what was going on. And honestly, you know, we've got to have some regulations when it comes to something like this. And no, I'm not totally opposed to it. We have to learn to live together, like my wife said. you know, but please don't let us. We've been together for 40 years. We met at Cox High School 49 years ago. Anyway, anything I can do to help y'all, please let me know.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Appreciate it.
Okay, Sarah Boggs.
Good afternoon. Trying to get my notes. My name is Sarah Boggs, and I'm in favor of option 3 with the modifications that the president of Siebert Realty, Patrick Keaton, recommended. My entire livelihood is in Sandbridge. I have worked in Sandbridge for 12 wonderful years with Siebert Realty. My husband owns a plumbing company based out of Sandbridge. My mother-in-law rents her house in Sandbridge. Our whole life is in Sandbridge. So these decisions affect my entire family and my son. So thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Boggs? Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Donna Megaminder? Well, maybe.
Yeah, come on up.
It looks like M-I-D-E-R.
Magruder.
No.
Yeah,
Okay.
well, maybe it's
Donna.
Are you Mrs. Magruder?
I am.
Okay, well, we got the right Donna.
Good. Good afternoon. My name is Donna Magruder, and I'm here to speak on behalf, believe it or not, of our guests, our visitors that come to Sandbridge, as well as my fellow citizens that depend on short-term rentals for their livelihood, and my family. So this kind of has selfish things. I appreciate very much that Patrick Keenan pretty much closed our office today so that all of our employees could be here, because over 90% of us are Virginia Beach citizens. And it would be a little difficult to try and take off, so he just made the decision, and I appreciate that very much. I've worked at Siebert Realty in Sandbridge for 27 years. I've been a resident of Virginia Beach for just a few months longer than that. And short-term rentals in Sandbridge were happening long before I came along. In my position at Siebert Realty, I've been very blessed to be able to reach out to guests that are multi-year repeat guests. I also, once in a while, an agent will call me and say, just heard this great story. The person's coming the first time. They had a friend tell them how wonderful Sandbridge was. So, of course, we reach out to them as well. The stories that I've been told of people growing up, vacationing in Sandbridge, multi-generations coming for, we have guests that have been coming 25 and 35 years in a row. And it is just amazing. We've had families that unfortunately one of the members have passed away, and they come back like as a memorial to that guest. And it really means a lot to be involved in something like that and to feel like that we have a part in the lifetime memories that are being made by families. Some guests, however, are only able to come for 3 or 4 days. And I recognize that you see like the national average is 4 days. My family would fall into that. My husband and I have 2 sons and with their wives. And by the end of May, we are going to have 4 grandchildren under the age of 2. I would hate to have to rent a much larger house because I've got 4 little people under 2.5 feet. But if you go 2 per bedroom, I would need to do that.
Ma'am?
Yes.
Watch the little red
Oh,
blinking.
sorry.
It says it's time.
Oh.
Yep.
I'm sorry.
Right,
Okay,
right.
thank
Wrap it
you.
up. Any questions for Ms. Magruder? Thank you.
Michael Meggie?
Mr. Chairman, commission members, first of all, I support short-term rentals with limited restrictions.
Can you state your name for the record, please?
Michael Meggie. I've lived in Virginia Beach since 1986, and after 10 years as a Navy SEAL, I separated from the service and decided to stay here and make Virginia Beach my home. I started a construction company, and over the last 20-plus years, I've grown it into a successful business. And during that time, I've acquired several rental properties that are an important part of my current income as well as my retirement plan. And I think it's important to know the rules that we have to work with, and changing those rules in the middle of a game can have a major impact on a person's life and business. I plan to rent a few of those properties on a short-term basis, which has been a standard practice along Shore Drive and in the beach neighborhoods for well over 50 years. But I also understand why the city is looking into the short-term rental issue. A few bad apples can spoil the barrel. And I know some neighborhoods and individuals have had bad experiences with short-term rentals. But this can also be true for a long-term rental or even a permanent, resident who lives next to you. And I truly believe that if the city would just simply apply the current laws and current codes in the city, that many of these problems would be avoided or even stopped. The reality is that most tenants are respectful to their neighbors and abide by the laws in the city. The fact of the matter is both rental property owners and full-time residents have the same property rights. And I hope the Planning Commission has the foresight and thought not to infringe on either one of those parties. And again, by enforcing the current codes that have been on the books and that people bought and understand run with the neighborhoods, if we enforce those current codes, we're protecting those property rights to the best of our ability. The biggest issue I've heard and that I have is limiting the number of days an owner can rent his or her property. I mean, this will be very difficult, if not impossible, to enforce. It won't solve any of the current issues, and I believe that is a taking of someone's property rights. The other major issue is, of course, the conditional use permit or creating an overlay district. It'll be very burdensome to the owner and a nightmare for the city. I mean, we all know what it takes to get a conditional use permit, all the hoops we have to jump through, the time. And you all know how difficult it is to draw lines on a map creating overlay districts. The taxes have already been taking place. There's a mechanism in place. We just want a fair, even keel registration. Punitive regulations are not the answer. And in closing, I understand how difficult it is for you guys to try to draft a one-size-fits-all ordinance to give to City Council. I hope we don't confuse the large event home issues with the regular short-term issues. They're completely different things. And I hope that either you guys give no recommendation, ask for more time to study this issue, because it is a very large issue, or just say, let's simply enforce the codes we have. And I think that will solve many of the issues that we're hearing today. Thank you for listening, and I truly appreciate your time and all the work you guys spend. Thank you very much.
Any questions for Mr. Megan?
So you're not in favor of any of these alternatives?
No, I don't, all the attorney, I think we need to work on some other issues besides that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I want to explain something because there may be, you please be seated. We do not have in our current ordinance language that allows for short-term rental property. That's the problem. Airbnb is out there. There are other things like that out there. Siebert and Sandbridge Real Estate have been in business for years. We need to put into our ordinance language that governs this activity. So his point is, let's just not have any and use the ordinance that we have. We don't, that's not a choice, okay? I want everybody to understand, we have to give the City Council a recommendation on a way to regulate and govern the human behavior that goes with renting short-term rentals or vacation cottages or event homes or whatever you want to call them. So if we didn't have to do this, I can promise you, we probably wouldn't be sitting up here. So City Council has come to the conclusion, and it's interesting, the way the laws in the state of Virginia work is the General Assembly tells the Virginia Beach city government through the Dillon Rule what we can have and what we can't have. In March of 2017, effective March of 2017, there was a Senate bill that gave us permission to do this. Before that got passed, we didn't have permission from the General Assembly to enact an ordinance that governed this behavior. And so we now have that, and we've been tasked with looking at recommendations. Fortunately, a lot of people for at least 2 years, we hear, have looked into this. The ad hoc committee, the Bayfront committee, lots and lots of neighborhoods have heard about that. So I don't want anybody to think that we're doing this in any sort of punitive way. We're doing it because we've been mandated to do it. Now, whether we come up, what kind of recommendation we come up with and when we come up with it, we honestly don't know. But we're here to listen to all the input you folks want to give us, and we're going to take that under advisement and process it and get it to City Council. So I just wanted you to answer your question, specific question. We need to draft something that City Council approves, and we need to put it in the ordinance to make this business venture legal. Everybody, so I just wanted you to know that. So call the next speaker, please.
Thank you. Tim Solnick?
Hello, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, City staff. Thank you for being here and getting record amounts of emails about this particular topic. I'll be super brief. One, my wife and I have been operating a short-term rental.
They need you to speak your name for the record.
Oh, I'm sorry, Tim Solonic, Ocean Park. We've been operating a short-term rental for years, and we are opposed to the arbitrary 7-day period because various people from, let's call it Washington, D.C., like to disappear for a few days, and they like staying in neighborhoods where it's quiet and peaceful, like Ocean Park. We've had guests who choose to stay with us to go to the Brock Environmental Center, which you guys all know you helped create. And to finish up quickly, I think the best recommendation possibly you guys could make would be to recommend the City Council to have a permanent committee to operate short-term rentals and event homes in the city. Since they've gone back decades, toothpaste is out of the tube. It's happened for years. Our cottage that we rent is apparently started as a short-term rental in 1950, beating Sandbridge. So it seems to me it's a vital part of tourism, the culture of Virginia Beach. It's not going to go anywhere, and it needs regulated. I want regulation. I don't want to live in a noisy neighborhood. We don't want idiots living next to us, short-term or long-term. So that's the idea. And I should have articulated that better. I thought, when I was on the ad hoc committee, about a permanent committee to maintain, peace and tranquility of all the neighborhoods dealing with this. And I probably should have reached out to you also. I apologize.
Well, thank you for your comments today. Any questions of Mr. Solonic? Thank you, sir.
Solonic.
Whatever. Wow.
Thank you.
Lynn Hume?
Hello. My name is Lynn Hume, and I've lived in the Shore Drive area since 1980. And I've been a realtor for over nearly 34 years, specializing in Shore Drive and the beach areas. I attend a lot of Civic League meetings all up and down Shore Drive, but I did not know anything about this being a citywide issue. I thought it was centered around Sandbridge and event homes. I did watch the November 15th meeting last year when 25 Sandbridge residents came up and spoke against many of these same amendments. Staff states they're using the Beaches and Waterways report. However, this report was not accepted by council in a formal meeting with public comment. In fact, on July of last year, council minutes show that Councilwoman Rosemary Wilson said the Beaches and Waterways Commission could not get their arms around this issue and they needed a new committee. And the chairman's letter to the city manager said that the consensus was not able to be made. Yet staff is relying on this draft. There's another report to the city from ODU, but they probably paid for it. It states that restrictive codes are not recommended, nor was limiting a person's use of his property or a visitor's right to choose. Allowing only 1 or 2 rentals a week is silly and not an enforceable amendment. One size does not fit all. People are not just here for a 7-day vacation, but for the military, sports tournaments, memorial services, and unexpected medical situations. An owner can lose thousands of dollars trying to juggle his dates to comply with some unenforceable code for a perceived result. It's nothing more than trying to detour the property from being rented. What's the difference between 7 days rented or 2 in 7 days? The same people are still there, the same amount of people. Staff even said that many of these amendments are not enforceable in the workshop. The city shouldn't create amendments that force a property owner to use a management company in order to comply with codes. Amendments shouldn't be made to expect a property owner, property manager, or a nice neighbor to be put in harm's way during disturbance. It's dangerous. At the workshop, when staff was asked why they picked the grandfather date of January 1st, they said, "It looked like a good date." Oh my gosh. Arbitrarily picking a date, forcing people to obtain a conditional use permit. Some property owners just bought this year, some have long-term plans, and some don't even know there's a tax code or a registry. We're not in the business of picking arbitrary twilight dates. And also, the 3-strike rule, is that run with the house or the owner? I don't know. At the workshop, staff said the ordinance is silent on it. It's here, it's in use. Taxes are already being collected. Current codes need to just be enforced, and the short-term rentals language needs to be added to the city code. Thank you for hearing me.
Any questions of Ms. Hume?
I do. Are you in favor of any of these options?
I think this whole thing
Compromise or
started
what?
with the event homes is the problem. I mean, I have a lot of rental properties, and I'm up and down Shore Drive. I'm involved in all the civic leagues and the BAC, the STC. I'm at all these meetings. I've never heard of these problems. It's the first time I heard of Bay Lake Pines. I'm up and down all these roads all the time. So I don't, it seems like there's an event home problem, Sandbridge, I guess Bay Lake Pines, but, maybe there needs to be something done with those properties. I don't know. I hate to take those people's rights away when they were built during zoning. They've got mortgages. So how are we going to now put regulations on those people that built in a certain zoning code? That's a really, I have a hard time with that. But if it needs to be added to code to say that short-term rentals are allowable, then that needs to be done. But all these restrictions, staff said they're not even really enforceable. So what are we doing here?
So you're looking for some type of compromise then?
A very limited compromise, very limited. I really think the one rental in 7 days is ridiculous. There's different, people come here for memorial services. My husband went to Orlando, and his whole family rented a house for his grandmother's funeral. And it was such a better way to be instead of hotel rooms. That family were together, they grieved together, they had their meals together. So there's more than just vacations. The military, the family that's coming to see their new recruit, it's not just vacations.
So so you don't really have an answer to my question then?
I think it's very limited. Address the event homes and add short-term rentals language that they're allowed in city code if that, helps. But event homes seem to be the issue. Tax is already taken care of. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dave Redmond.
So, I've got a question for the city attorney. In the code, in terms, I want to be clear about this, based on Mr. Thornton's comments, code does not allow for short-term rentals.
It is not mentioned in the code, therefore it is not allowed.
Okay. There's a way to have it allowed,
Put it in the code.
but not have any of these things.
Yes, you can do that.
Okay, I do not want this assumption to get out there that in order to have something comply now with code, it has to come off this list. It does not. There are not 3 alternatives. And it is not the case that people have to choose from 3 alternatives or any of these choices, any of these. I think some of these are important. You could probably write a 1-paragraph amendment to the city's ordinance that would make short-term rentals legal, I'm guessing. And it might not.
It took me at least 5 pages.
You're thinking a little more than that? You're thinking a couple paragraphs, okay. But in any event, it is not the case that this stuff came down from heaven
No.
and we have to do some assemblage of this and make it happen. It could be that. So I don't want to have that assumption be falsely taken. So anyway, thank you.
Thank
you. Thank you, Kay.
Okay.
Our next speaker is Joan Rose.
Really ought to go
not going to read what I wrote, because listening here today, there's a big difference if you live someplace and you have problems in your neighborhood, which we do, and you own a rental home. That's pretty obvious from listening to everybody. But I have studied the three alternatives, and the one that I want to recommend to you is 2. None of us thinks it goes far enough, but it will give us a compromise between the right to have weekly rentals, which I do support. We've had them for a long time. They didn't used to be a problem, and the rights of the people who live beside them. Many have young children. A lot of people in Sandbridge are retired. It's your job to get some kind of balance, and I believe you will. But just to say, let's just go on like we have, when we all know there's problems, and we're looking for you for some suggestions, please don't do that. It's our home. We live there. I've raised my daughter there. We have problems, and we're asking you to help us fix it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Jeffrey Francis.
Jeff, I believe.
Okay. Doug Houston.
Good afternoon. My name is Doug Houston. I moved to the Shore Drive area 39 years ago and have rented properties on a seasonal basis since then. In addition, I also manage long-term rentals. When I first read the proposals from the ad hoc committee, I was dumbfounded. Some of the ideas dealing with trash, parking, conditional use permit, 7-day limitation, marking emergency exits, appear to be regulations looking for a problem. My perception is that these fixes are more appropriate for issues at event houses, and that mixing them as a solution for short-term rentals is a mistake. In all of my years dealing with rentals, I see no distinction with tenant issues, whether they are on a short-term seasonal lease or on a long-term lease. I cannot imagine having an unruly tourist staying in an oceanfront hotel playing music loud, disturbing the neighbors. Then an ad hoc committee proposes to limit a hotel contract to 1 per 7 days as the fix. This is a solution that does not address the problem. So, Mr. Redmond, I appreciate your comment about the 3 solutions. I propose solution number 4. And solution number 4 would be to address the issue that brought this up in the first place, which it appears to be, from all of these comments, the vast majority are Sandbridge. I think a few speakers have said that. The vast majority of the issues are event houses. Correct. So I would ask the Planning Commission to take a step back, focus on the event houses. I don't have a solution there. I don't know enough about those in order to address it. I don't live in Sandbridge. But it seems like that's where the issues exist. For short-term rentals, state and city laws are already in place to collect the appropriate lodging taxes. I don't know anybody that is not in support of that. Allow the laws already on the books regarding noise, trash, parking to do their job. Please do not attempt to further regulate them. So getting back to, I know you've asked, what's your proposal? If we need to have a proposal on short-term rentals, my suggestion is require a $1 million policy, liability policy, and call it a day.
Thank you, sir. Any questions of Mr. Houston? Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you. Anders Hellstrom.
My name's Anders Hellstrom. I grew up in Sandbridge. My family's lived or owned property in Sandbridge since 1970. As an adult, I have 2 homes. I've got one in Kempsville. I've got one in Sandbridge. And as we're sitting here today, I was doing the math in my head. I'm paying 7 times the amount of tax in Sandbridge that I am in my home in Kempsville. Do I see the services for that? Some of them, I agree, it's nice not to have your houses washing out into the ocean, I guess, which has been a problem that's been solved, although I was there when that was going on, right? My feeling for the regulations that are being imposed when I look at the 3 choices, and just for the record, I'm opposed to all of them. And I appreciate your position, Mr. Thornton, about the fact that, something needs to come out of this, this meeting, right? The question I would ask, and please don't answer right now, but the question I would ask myself right now is I know I passed the real estate exam. I didn't get in back then because I had too many rental properties. I only have one now. So my home in Sandbridge, we visit there on weekends when we can get there. I rent it out to help pay expenses out there. If we had limited during the downswing in 2008, 2009, if we had the limitations that we are proposing today, the less than 2 rentals in a week period of time, I probably would have lost my house. So there's a lot of houses going back then, but not mine. Anyways, the question I would ask, please don't answer, are rentals, as a person that owns property in Virginia Beach, am I allowed to rent my property? I think the answer is yes. So is it defined that that's a 30-day rental or a 1-day rental? Please answer that on your own. I think the main problem and the main reason that we're here, and I guarantee you half the people wouldn't even be sitting here today if we were to impose the restrictions that are already in the codes. Unfortunately, about 10 years ago, we took the teeth out of the noise ordinance. Now it's almost impossible to prove that somebody's making too much noise in the house next to you. Back then, you were able to file a Class 1 misdemeanor, and if they had a party one night and they came back the next night and did the party again, and you had all their names, we're taking people to jail. We don't do that anymore. We've taken the teeth out of our ordinances. We've got plenty of ordinances in place. We've got taxes. I'm for, everybody having insurance, although I don't think you should force it on them. People should. They'll weed themselves out if they don't. Maybe include in the tax some type of thing like the builders have to pay a tax for that. And we have like a little insurance policy for somebody that has a big liability incident that happens, and then, we take care of that out of that fund. As far as the short-term rentals, again, I'm for none of the proposals. If we had to pick something, as anything, 2 rentals per week, I think is reasonable. I feel like the number of people in my house and the problems that we've been having with the amount of parking at these event homes, I don't really understand how that even took place. How do you issue a permit for building a large home and don't have enough parking? I know.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any questions
Any questions?
of Mr. Hellstrom?
Sure.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Connie Carlock?
My name is Connie Carlock, and I thank you all for volunteering your time to continue to make Virginia Beach a wonderful place to live. I'm a lifelong resident of this area, and I live in Bay Lake Pines. Our neighborhood is not, as Mr. Reeves said regarding Sandbridge, a resort neighborhood, nor do we want to become one. That is why we are asking for regulations to the short-term rental business. This affects all Virginia Beach neighborhoods. Even though it seems to be magnified in Sandbridge, whatever is done will affect the whole city for the future. So that's my concern. We live in a beautiful bayfront neighborhood with bayfront property, and it's a nice place to be. My son and daughter-in-law live in Charlottesville, and they rent their house once or twice a year through Airbnb. My daughter-in-law screens her clients, and the neighbors have a way to contact them. They are very vested in their neighborhood because it's their neighborhood, and this works there. However, it's quite a different thing to have a full-time mini hotel next door. Two very different things. If you do vote to regulate this industry, please vote for something close to Alternative 2, which I believe would be in the best interest of all Virginia Beach residents. Please take your time to deliberate this. It's a very important issue, and we need to protect all Virginia Beach neighborhoods. And just as a side note, my family goes camping a lot, and whenever we go register for a campsite, there's always a 2-vehicle limit for parking. So, thank you.
Any questions of Ms. Carlock? Thank you.
Okay, Frank Driscoll. Frank Driscoll. Gail Buckner.
Yeah, Frank
Oh, I'm sorry.
Driscoll's coming.
Chairman, Planning Board, City Attorney, thank you for hearing us out this afternoon. I just want to introduce myself. Frank Driscoll. I own a beach house at 2401 Sandpiper Road. Me and my wife, our family, has operated the house over the last 5 years, and I just want to bring one of the issues up that hasn't been addressed today. We rent it through vacation rental by owner. We do it ourselves. That enables us to make sure that we are very careful in ensuring that we have tenants from all over the Northeast and believe it or not, all over the world that come to Virginia Beach, that they enjoy their time there and also respect all the other residents of Virginia Beach. Now, the one problem I have, I just want to state my position. Number one, I really don't see the difference between option 1, 2, and 3. They all contain the same capricious and arbitrary and unnecessary regulations. I think that we need to, in the event that, some regulations need to be worked out, I think that we need to narrowly tailor them to address the issues. Now, the two issues I heard that we were talking about are the event homes and also, that's actually the only issue I've heard today is the event homes. Now, we own about a 2,600 square foot house with 4 bedrooms, and we don't let more than 8 people stay at our house. But I don't see any reason why we shouldn't be able to have 10 or 12. Now, I want the Planning Commission, and there's been some great speakers before me. Carl Leeson did a great job, option 4. Let's get an option 4. Joan Davis did a great job, and, Jimmy Reeves, a lot of people are saying we don't want all these regulations. It doesn't address the true problem. When Sandbridge was created, it has always been a residential resort area that has always, had weekly rentals or 3 or 4 day rentals. So, I look at some of these regulations that we're talking about, and, the owner or the owner's agent must be identified and be able to be present on the site within 30 minutes. I mean, that is unworkable. It is. I live in Heritage Park. I'm not far away, but even then, depending on traffic, it's difficult to get to your house in that amount of time. Now, based on that, I live in Heritage Park. I don't want any short-term rentals in Heritage Park, but there has to be a distinguishment. There has to be a distinguishment made from traditional resort areas near the beach where people have been renting for years and years and years and have benefited our city, giving us some of the best recreation centers in the country, and so many of the benefits that we have. The other thing that we've skipped over, and it just scares me to no end, is that if we're adjudicated violations of 3 applicable local, state, or federal laws or regulations may result in the revocation of said registration. Okay, now can anybody tell me what local, state, or federal laws that if they are violated, we can lose our right to rent our home? And how many people, if they cannot rent their home, would either have to put it up for sale, okay, or if they can't sell it, they'll go into foreclosure and lose their home. In addition, and if I could have 1 more minute, Chairman, please.
in addition, they're talking about one rental contract during any consecutive 7 days. Now, my understanding, the whole purpose of this, okay, well, one of the main purposes is to promulgate the health, safety, and regulations and to protect the neighborhood. How does that protect the neighborhood? How does restricting to one rental within a 7-day period, how does that assist? I mean, if anything, it has an adverse impact on the economy and the citizens of Virginia Beach. If we have good renters come from, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and all over the country and all over the world that benefit and provide employment for all these people that are behind me, it seems that what we have here is we have certain residents that want to turn a traditionally resort residential neighborhood that's always rented to, people to enjoy the beach to just a residential neighborhood. And that's like moving next to an airport and then trying to get the airport moved. When these people came here, every single person, I've been going to Sandbridge since the early 70s. It's been a residential, resort residential short-term rental. It already has. And I think, and I haven't looked into the legal issues regarding whether just because it's not, not permitted in the zoning ordinance doesn't mean that, we can continue to do the short-term rentals. I mean, the city's been collecting taxes on those short-term rentals for 50 years. Well, I could, but anyway, I think that Mr. Redmond had a good point, that if that has to be done, let's go ahead and say, okay, let's permit a short-term rentals like they've always had. And then if there's an issue with the event houses, and I don't think we should have a RV parked out front that, ticket them, enforce the laws as they are. Thank you very much.
I got a quick question.
Question for,
I just want to make sure, so you're for short-term rentals in Sandbridge?
Oh, yes, I'm for
But just not Heritage Park?
Yeah, well, where it's traditionally been, this is a Virginia Beach resort area. But I understand, I forgot the one neighborhood they're talking about, but, I wouldn't be a big fan of short-term rentals in Heritage Park. But like I said, I have a house in Sandbridge too. And, we plan on living there too. And, we've stayed there for an extended period of times, but Sandbridge has had short-term rentals since the 60s and 70s and on. And if I lived there full-time and people continue to do short-term rentals, I understand that that's the way it was, and that's the way, the way it should stay.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
thank you.
Thank you.
Gail Buckner,
Had to leave.
she had to leave, okay. Steve Ballard. Well, if he had to leave, we're getting through these last few real quick, aren't we? Julie Broom.
All right.
Good afternoon. I'm Jill Broom, and I am a resident of Aries on the Bay. We are a 240-unit neighborhood of townhouses and single-family houses. And each one of those units has a deed restriction that limits rentals to no less than 30 days. And so I am the treasurer of the Aries on the Bay Civic League, and I've been authorized by our board to make a brief comment to you. The Aries on the Bay Civic League supports existing deed restrictions on short-term rentals, and they should not be superseded or infringed upon by new city regulations. The Aries on the Bay Civic League believes that neighborhoods with existing deed restrictions governing rental periods should not be subject to proposed changes without approval and consent of their respective civic leagues or homeowners associations. And that's the end of my comments.
Thank you. I think our attorney would tell you that the deed restrictions are between the people that live there, and this will not, and this should not in any way mitigate or affect or change your deed restrictions.
That's great. That's what
And
we
I mean,
like.
if somebody violates your deed restriction, you also can't go to the city and ask the city to enforce it. So that's a group of rules that apply to the people that live in your condo.
Okay.
But anyway, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Anybody have any questions of?
I was just going to say, you could go back and tell them how effective you were today.
Thank you.
Exactly what you wanted.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, and our last speaker, so this is last but not least, right, is Claire Yoder.
Switch gets wide.
I'm Claire Yoder, Croatan, somebody from Croatan finally. I am on the board. I'm not speaking officially for them because we did not come to any conclusions on this complicated piece of ordinances, the proposals. I took the time to look up ordinances in many cities. This is not a new issue. It's certainly not an issue just for Virginia Beach. DC, Myrtle Beach, Nashville, just for fun. I'm a semi-retired lawyer, so I enjoy that kind of thing. And I didn't see any that had these type of restrictions and, conditional use, and nor do I think you want to get involved with doing something that literally no one has ever done. So I would suggest you look at these models and generate something on your own with the attorney here and kind of then having taken these comments, which I think is wonderful, but then kind of put that forward, because I don't think this group is in as much disagreement as, I think it's kind of come together. On a personal note, though, I am very opposed to event houses. I do not think that they are residential, and I'll read you something from the Conference of Mayors, who last year made the statement that short-term rentals are a non-commercial activity, governed by the same or similar guidelines and laws as those governing long-term residential rental properties, including the absence of additional laws or ordinances for dealing with nuisance issues already covered under existing municipal and city codes. They urge support for economic development opportunities through the visitors industry by encouraging regulations of short-term rental industry that establish a reliable way for the municipality to identify and contact the short-term rental owner, make the tax collection and remittance clear to the short-term rental owner, and treat short-term rentals the very same as long-term. I think that's also been pretty well established nationwide, that you can't take just Sandbridge, or you can't take just short-term, you can't take 1 week or 1 day. They're rentals in residential areas. And I personally feel that when you do get to some draft resolution on this, that you'll look at that as an issue for both long and short-term. And event houses, that was the commercial part, are a commercial activity. This is not recognized as a residential use. I don't know if a conditional use permit might be applying to that in your vision, but when you bring people together for the express purpose of raising money, for an event, that is a commercial activity. And hosting such a thing, generates a different kind of revenue and a different kind of consequences than it would if you had, just renting your home as a home share. And it also discriminates against, never mind. Well, that's it. Thank you.
Any questions of Ms. Yoder? Thank you.
Last
Appreciate you
person?
coming.
That was our last speaker.
Okay, well, with that, we will close the public hearing, and we will start discussing this amongst ourselves.
Just an observation, if I could.
Sure.
Ms. Yoder, all the emails that we got, did anybody remember getting any others from Croatan? We got a lot of letters, and when I say a lot, like Bob said this morning, probably more than I've received in 7 years total from any other application or anything coming through us. And I think I was our first speaker from Croatan. I don't remember any other emails from there. So I'm thinking, is there anybody here from Shadowlawn, which is also not really a beach community, but still walkable distance to the ocean front? Yeah, and I didn't have one person in my neighborhood contact me about this, send me an email. And, Croatan being more right on the ocean, I thought I would have heard more from there. And then to me, it's just is this really that isolated to where it's just Sandbridge and just up more on Shore Drive and that area? Or event houses, right. So I'm still torn. Is this that big of an issue?
Well, David has his hand up, and then Dee.
Well, yeah, the first thing that I've been struck with this afternoon is, it's clear to me that there's a big issue and a very small one.
Mm-hmm.
The big issue is event houses, in my view. And I think we have been done a disservice by taking all of this, throwing it into one pot, and putting a big cover over the whole thing and boiling it up as though it's one, and it's not. I think there's a fundamental problem with these event houses, the number of people in them, how they are parked, the noise that they generate, photographs I've seen today of these, as buses and, tractor trailers and the like that are out in front of them. I'll bet that's a disturbance. And I think that has to be dealt with. But I think where this process got off course is it stopped focusing in that and dumped in all these other things about short-term rentals. Virginia Beach has had short-term rentals since there was a beach. Okay, we've had short-term rentals longer than any of us have been alive. I mean, there's a resort community where you can see photographs of these women in hoop skirts holding parasols in the early 1900s. So we have been that kind of community for a very long time, and that's not going to change. And I think the vast, vast majority of problems are associated with those big houses, however that might be. And in one of the issues in the Shore Drive corridor, with one of the speakers today, was about an event house there. So I think we need to deal with the problems that arise in these places and deal with that. If it's parking, if it's noise, if it's, if it's drunk people sitting in the street when Wally goes driving down, then those have to be dealt with. But to suggest at the beginning of the process that you have to have these very, very onerous restrictions, anticipating that at the end they all are going to turn out like Animal House, I think is just wrong. And in many cases, people, as I said this morning, people spent 10 years trying to pull together a mortgage payment, 30 years paying off their mortgage, and then get told that you're going to have to limit the economic enjoyment of something they spent their whole lives trying to acquire. And for them, it might be close to all they got. And I just think that's wrong. Anyway, I do think there are some elements of this little table. I think the manner in which this was presented to us was just flat. I mean, this was the wrong way to go about this, in my view. This three alternatives thing is the wrong way to go about it. And it's got us a little bit wrapped around the axle. I think what we need to do is sit down, go through some of these. There is not a scenario that I will support with a conditional use permit or an overlay district. I'm just not going to do it. I think there are elements here that I do question the insurance. If someone wants to take risk on their own, I don't know that you go around telling them that you're going to protect them from themselves, but I could probably accept that. The occupancy, the parking, I think those are things we're going to have to craft some and make sure that we got them right. I don't know this is exactly right, but I think we might get there. We haven't had it very long. Like everybody, I think this morning, or I shouldn't assume that, but I mean, I'd be in favor of deferring this till at least February. Council chooses to take it up, let them take it up, and I think we get back to work to try and zero in on the issues where I think we can make a difference. The trash thing, I saw a photo of some trash here. Well, that kind of looks like my house. When the wind whips up, I mean, or the raccoons get into my can. I mean, it's not always the case that somebody has done something wrong. If somebody leaves a broken bicycle out there or something like that, that's a different story, but frequently that just happens in some places. So I think a lot of this is overblown, but for the event houses, I think we have to really focus on that because that's where it sounds like most of the problems are, but not violate the rights that people have built up over their whole lives. In many cases, it's their retirement. It's how they hand their home over to to their family or to an estate or something like that. And I'm just not going to get in the way of that. So anyway, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think we, after hearing everybody, and I thank everybody for taking the time to come down here and sit here as long as it's taken to hear everybody. The issue is we live in a resort town, and that's what it is. I said you can compare it to other cities, and unless you're actually comparing it to a city that borders on the ocean and has a tourist industry that pretty much funds the entire city, and those things help, put our lay roads and all those things for us. It's hard to distinguish whether you should rent your house or not. I mean, I grew up with my father telling us that we had to leave Memorial Day, so he could rent our house on a weekly basis and pay for the mortgage. But, and then that's what it is. But we've got three issues, and Sandbridge is a resort area. It's a resort neighborhood, and that's how it was semi-designed, and that's what it is. And so, just like when you go down to the ocean front, you know what you're going to encounter, and you have to deal with it. We've got a couple of things that I think that is the event houses, which we didn't quite see coming, and the impact that they would have, the amount of people that they hold, the parking, the trash, all the things that go along with them. And the other thing that came along that I think took us all by surprise a little bit was the Airbnb. They came in and they went into places that we weren't accustomed to, where we would normally have a rental house. We're used to having them at the north end, on the Shore Drive corridor, definitely some in Croatan, all of Sandbridge. But all of a sudden, you've got an Airbnb in Kempsville or wherever they are. They're not regulated. There's no contact person. You're not quite sure what's going on. They don't rent normally the way our other resort houses rent. Ours normally rent on a weekly basis during the summer, and off-shoulder, they usually try to rent them twice a week just to cover it due to school, basically is how that sort of evolved. And the Airbnbs just sort of came out of nowhere, and they're great. I mean, the young, my kids use them when they went to California and things like that. But there's got to be a way to sort of rein in and figure out how they fit into our resort area as a whole. And I think that's the issue is you've got event houses and Airbnb, but to lump them into Sandbridge or Croatan or North End, where it is accustomed to rent your house or or own several houses that you rent, I think that we have to somehow figure out how to separate them and deal with them accordingly some way.
Thank you. Anybody else? Jan?
I heard several issues that, and I'm in agreement with what they've said, is I think we need to determine a way to separate the two, because even people who were very for short-term rentals in Sandbridge were not for short-term rentals in their the more traditional neighborhood. So I'm wondering if we need to do something that can take a look at, and maybe that requires two ordinances. Maybe that requires an ordinance that just handles short-term rentals in the resort areas, beach districts, and then one that handles short-term rentals in the city overall. Because we do have to address the whole city. We can't just address only Sandbridge or only the North End or, only Bay Lake or only Shore Drive. I mean, what we've got to come up with has got to be for the whole city of Virginia Beach. I mean, that's what we're tasked with. I totally agree with Dave that I think the city council sort of put us in a bind by saying, you need to make a decision at your December meeting and get this back to us. I totally agree that is, that's going to be really tough, because I was taking sort of tally notes of what everybody, that came forward was talking to. We only had one person that liked the overlay option. Most people liked option 2, but everybody wanted a compromise to option 2. There were several people that liked option 3, but the people who liked option 3 wanted a compromise for option 3. So there was maybe just a couple people that said, this is what I like and that's what I like. Just about everybody else talked about needing some kind of compromise. And so I think we need to have time for that compromise.
Okay, Ron?
Well, I want to thank the citizens for coming down too, whether you're business related or neighborhood citizen related. We appreciate that very much. And it's helped us to focus on this in a good way. And some of the major issues already been mentioned. I'm not going to be redundant. But you mentioned the word compromise, and that's what I heard. And not only today, but people coming to see me or calling me or writing letters. But it sounds like to me there's a lot of people that agree on a lot of things. there are some things they don't agree on, or there's some other position they'd like to see taken. And so I think we've moved the ball right far. That's the way I see it. And because we've been doing this a long time, and you kind of see things starting to come together. And I think we can put together something that's not too onerous, but yet is protective of the neighborhood as well. And the Airbnb and the event homes, they're a special animal. And like you said, the resort has been operating as a resort, but the resorts reside in a neighborhood, and we have to be very mindful of that. And I think the real estate companies understand that. I think somebody said it very well. I think it was Jim Reeves, and he said, they reside in that community. They're good citizens. They work with the neighborhoods to the best extent they can. And I think that's very truly the case. So no matter what we do, it needs to be a balanced solution, and that's kind of what we're going to be looking for.
Chairman?
Mike? Mike?
I just want to emphasize the fact to the folks that have come down and shared their thoughts with us today that most of us are just dealing with this issue for the first time in a real serious, focused manner. There are a lot of people out there and others that aren't here that have been dealing with this apparently for a couple of years. We have not, most of us have not been involved in that process. So we're getting this ball handed to us here in a recent month or so, and we appreciate now. This is the first time we've had a public hearing on it. We've had workshops, a couple, but very recently. So, and obviously there's tremendous diversity of opinion on this topic. It's pretty obvious, and not only from you all over here today, but emails that we've gotten have been described by other commission members. So it's pretty difficult to do a responsible job of making a recommendation to the council where we are today in our progress. And one other thing I want to say, as far as what Dee was talking about, we have to also recognize that we've gotten this map where this city staff has determined, and from our Commissioner of Revenue Information Registry, there are short-term rentals all over this city. And people come here not just to recreate at the ocean front, but they come here for soccer tournaments. They come here and they want to be Airbnb, or they want a short-term rental. They come here for a big convention that's going on at the convention center. They don't care about being at the ocean front. They don't want to pay perhaps for a hotel room, or they want to be in a group, and they want to be in a group situation, as was described by a couple speakers. And they want to be in a family group, or they want to be in a business group, staying in the same place. And so there's all kinds of different demands and desires for people who come to Virginia Beach as the largest city in our state to either recreate or do business or play sports. So we got to really think about this more than before we can make a decision.
Jack?
I'd support a deferral.
Okay. Jack?
Yeah, and I mean, I hate to not be able to make a decision today, especially since, all these individuals came here, some exceptional individuals came to speak, and, maybe that's, because of that. But I think there are a lot of things to consider. I think that, maybe we should delay.
Jeff?
First, I'd like to thank everybody for coming down, and I apologize for being 110 degrees in here today. This is probably the hottest it's ever been. But I got a lot of great information from everybody that came up there, ways of thinking about some of the things and issues that I necessarily didn't think about. So I'm hoping that we do defer this, but just know that your time down here wasn't wasted, especially with me today, because I am going to take away a lot from your input. So thank you very much.
Jan, and
I was
then
going to say, if nobody else has comments, I'm prepared to
we
make a
got
motion.
two more hands down here. Dr. Quasny?
I have to say that I've been trying to stay in the loop on this for the last couple of years, and I felt as though I knew this subject quite well, but there are so many layers to it, and some of them were just recently identified to me today, and I feel strongly that we would be irresponsible in trying to make a decision today on such a complicated, complex issue that affects so many people. I also think that there should be some opportunity for all of us to reach out and have more discussions, and then to make a more educated, careful decision, working together to do that. So I'm in support of deferring it as well.
Don?
For those of you who don't know me, I'm not a big regulation person. I'm not a big fan of just putting regulations. It seems like me, regulations require more enforcement, and that's something we don't have. So, but sometimes when problems arise, you know, there has to be some regulations put in place, and so that's. And I'm proud of the commission that, you know, I saw yesterday. I didn't attend the first workshop, but it was one yesterday, and I saw the commissioners that were there. You know, we were struggling trying to get things figured out, and that's not really characteristic of the way this commission operates. Usually we can get things figured out pretty quick, and today I'm seeing the evidence now that we're finally working in the manner that we should be working. We've heard from the public, and now we've got some good things that we can sit down and analyze, and I think over the next month or two, whatever it takes, we can put something together that'll be satisfactory to everybody here, because you know, that definitely we probably need a few regulations, but I don't see where we need a big book of regulations and things for people to. Main thing I don't want to hurt is people who've been in business for many, many years doing this short-term rentals, and we put on regulations that affect the small individuals, you know, that have been doing this for many years and invested their retirement in a home at Sandbridge or wherever it is, but Sandbridge most prevalent. It's here today, I think. So I'm hoping that we'll get a motion here shortly and ask for a deferral, and maybe we can get this thing put to rest in the next month or so.
Mr. Chairman?
Sir.
I was going to ask Ms. Wilson if she would give us a cheat sheet again about how to make a motion.
Jan.
Oh, she's got it already.
Yeah,
Right. You did your cheat sheet.
I want to make just one quick statement, then I'm going to ask for a motion. Normally, when we come down here, and many of you have probably been here and seen us work, we have a staff that does a fabulous job, and we have applicants that work with the staff through the whole process. So when applications come before us and the applicant's comfortable with the staff's comfortable with the applicant, we put it on the consent agenda, and you saw us do that at the beginning of this meeting. So we rarely get into the weeds on anything like we've done on this case. And I want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank you for your input. I especially want to thank the staff. When we started this process last month, we were handed 3 alternative ordinances. Well, none of us are trained to read a 25-page ordinance with all the legal jumbo in it. And so this sheet that we've been working off of is sort of a condensed version of what those ordinances tried to do. We didn't invent this alternative 1, 2, and 3. These came from input, as Karen said, over the last 2 years. So what we've done today is we hopefully have listened to you. We hear your concerns, and we want to do a good job of making a good recommendation to City Council. So with that, do I have a motion on this matter? Jan?
Chairman Thornton, I'd like to make a motion to defer this item to our February 2018 Planning Commission hearing and request that City Council provide an extension for this continuance to allow us more time to consider this item.
Do I have a second?
Second.
And this item would be items 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14.
Thank you.
Correct. Made by Mr. Redmond, second by Redmond, and motion by Jan.
Okay, we're ready. I'm going to ask you, Mr. Hobson.
Aye.
Horsley.
Here. Aye.
Present.
I'm still here.
Inman.
Yay?
You said nay?
No.
Yay.
Yay.
I'm Oliver. Ms. Oliver.
Aye.
Redmond.
Aye.
Ripley.
Aye.
Brzezinski.
Aye.
Thornton.
Aye.
Wall.
Aye.
And Weiner.
Aye.
By a recorded vote of 11-0, the commission has deferred items 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14 to the February Planning Commission hearing and will request an extension from the City Council.
Thank you. Well, on behalf of the council, on behalf of the Planning Commission, we want to thank you all for coming, your time, your input, and if you still want to participate in the process, we'd love to see you in February. Thank you, and is there any... Is there any additional business? Meeting adjourned.